doctors that can do quite clever things to get people, particularly in motorbikes, back into...
We're starting to see down in the pit lane the actual bona fide bits of aero kit that teams intend to race at the Bahrain Grand Prix. So Ferrari have put what looks like to be their absolutely, this is what we're going to race Bahrain rear wing on. I'm also seeing what I'm calling the snow shovel rear wing on the Alpine with a very, very pronounced scooped middle section. Sometimes we've seen on the Mercedes as well. They go sort of down and up a bit in the outer section, the middle section. Just that is a lovely little sculpt car with those low straight line speed numbers and all that drag. They're not the wings we're going to run at a Bahrain Grand Prix. So there's some more wings coming for Mercedes as well.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kravitz, down there in the pits. And lay it up with the sunscreen as you need to be in that pit lane. And yeah, going through the programs, illuminating us on the rear wings. We've already seen a problem for one rear wing with the DRS of Ferrari today, so the joys of watching testing.
Now, on the straight line speed of the Mercedes, and actually this car, the McLaren as well, they both seem to be quite down on straight line speed. That's not something that's new. We saw that all the way through the 2022 season on all of the Mercedes-powered cars. There was some issue, you could see it in some of the data with the Mercedes power unit, and it's sometimes referred to by drivers as clipping. Essentially, the hybrid system runs out of electrical energy towards the end of a straight, and the car just almost slows down when the driver's still at full throttle, just at the end of the straight, and it just gives them a little deceleration almost. And that means their top speeds don't reach the heights of, say, Red Bull with their really high speeds with those Honda power units. And that was a little bit of an Achilles heel for all of the Mercedes-powered cars. But aerodynamic drag also, if you haven't got an efficient aerodynamic package, i.e. you're getting good downforce for a low drag level, then that's also going to make it even worse. And I think that's what you're seeing both with Mercedes and with McLaren. McLaren already said that they've got concerns about that, whereas Mercedes are saying, well, we heard what Ted maybe they'll bring it a bit more pace today. And Toto Wolff was saying they were hiding a little bit still, and they'll see a bit more today.
Perfect stuff. Perfect stuff. Oscar Piastri on the back straight, on the Mark Webber down there. In the pit lane. Part of his management. Through the junior Formula One. Let's have a comparison now of the cars that we expect to be at the front of the field for the opening Grand Prix of the year. And we can have a little bit of a comparison, I believe, between the two of the front-running cars. So this is heading down into turn 10. We've got the Red Bull and the Ferrari.
Yeah, you can really see just that some of the overall shape of the car. If you're a very much, this is your first time watching Formula One, they probably look very similar to you. But when you start looking at the overall shapes of the car, yeah, the side pods are slightly different shape. The wings are really quite a different shape. Look how much flatter the wings of the RB19 are to the SF23. But also the shape of them is quite different. It's the shape you're looking at more than the angle in some ways, because that tells you a little bit more about what the teams are doing. But you're also seeing that fundamental difference in approach between Ferrari and Red Bull that we saw last year. The front suspension of the Red Bull is a pull rod front suspension. So you can see that diagonal element going down to the base. That's the bit that makes the springs and dampers work as the wheels go up and down. And then you can see on the Ferrari, the diagonal element is going upwards. There's a sort of an upwards triangle, and that is the springs and dampers are mounted higher in the chassis. Now, the advantage for Red Bull is that they've got a lower center of gravity of those parts mounted low in the chassis, whereas Ferrari have got them higher up. But from a packaging point of view, it makes the Ferrari solution more likely to be reliable. It's much easier to work on. For Red Bull, it's a much bigger job to make any suspension changes on their car or setup changes at the front end. Red Bull staunchly believe that that's a big aerodynamic advantage by having that layout. Ferrari, clearly, their engineers and wind tunnel disagrees with that. But all of those layouts of those suspension parts, it's nothing to do with getting the car to go around the corner best, and there's no suspension layout that you're seeing visibly that's going to make you work better around the corner. The reason they're doing this is purely aerodynamic. But as the cars go through the corner, you start to see some more fundamental concept differences. Look at the shape of the side pod on the Ferrari SF23. You can see it's almost like a wall going upwards with those big scoops out of the center, which you can't really see from the side, but it's quite clear to see here. Whereas the Red Bull side pod is an entirely different concept with that big swoop down towards the rear above the O of Oracle. Whereas look at the R of Ray-Ban on the Ferrari side pod, and it's much, much higher. So Ferrari are taking a completely different approach to side pod design. And as the footage moves forward ever so slightly, you'll notice that the rear, it's the opposite to the front. So while Ferrari had push rod front suspension, it's got pull rod rear. Red Bull have done the exact opposite. So it is opposites day. But the big undercut on the side pod of the Red Bull now becomes really apparent in this footage, whereas look at the Ferrari, not really an undercut at all from this angle. You can really see that difference so clearly. And the difference in the cooling louvres as well. Ferrari, huge cooling louvres. That Ferrari V6 and the power unit clearly requiring quite a bit of cooling. Red Bull, the Honda power unit, a little bit less. Or are they cooling it in a slightly different way? It's hard to see with the bodywork on the cars. Then as we get round to the rear of the cars, the overall shape of the diffusers of Formula One cars are pretty restricted by the regulation, which is why it's not back in the days where we really want to look at the diffusers. But you can see those beam wings above around the exhaust pipe. Very different concept again. Red Bull's beam wings are quite aggressive, quite abrupt, sticking very thick and sort of sticking upwards, whereas Ferrari are much thinner, much more delicate beam wings. So again, a very different concept. And you can just see on the right-hand side of the screen a small section of the floor. The Ferrari floor, much flatter, much more simple in some areas, and the Red Bull, much more intricate. And that's something I think you might see develop on both of those cars. But that is a very expensive area to develop in terms of wind tunnel and CFD time. And Ferrari have got a lot more of that than Red Bull do.
I think after 19 hours of live broadcasting, that's the single best thing we've had on pre-season testing TV chat. You can mic drop and leave the studio now, Sam. That was sensational, mate. Loved that. Really enjoyed that. Thank you, buddy. That was really
Stay there.
good.
We'll do it with another 2 cars in a minute.
That was great. Really enjoyed that.
Which do you prefer?
Aesthetically,
Just from concept point of view, throw all the results out. The engineer in you, which do you prefer, and why?
I like the Ferrari solution. I do. I like the push-rod front suspension, which I think is easier to work on. I like their rigid sticking to this side pod concept, that drag-reducing side pod concept. I really like that. But it wasn't faster last year than the Red Bull in a lot of situations. Those cars, this is one of the things I love about these regulations, right? They're so different to one another, yet they're producing pretty much the same lap time, but in a different way. We saw last year, and I hope we're going to see it again this year, the Red Bull has great top speed, it's good in high-speed corners. The Ferrari has fantastic acceleration and is brilliant in slow corners. And last year, I was watching a bit of Drive to Survive last night, and I think in the second episode, you get a sort of you can really remember that wonderful battle between Charles Leclerc and Max Verstappen in the Grand Prix here last year, and that was exactly why that battle was so good. The Red Bull could blitz the Ferrari down the straights, but as soon as they get into the corners, Leclerc could just get in position and blitz him back, and it just made for really good entertainment. And I think we're on for a big diet of that this year as well, but with the potential addition of a few other interlopers at the front of the field. And I'm never going to rule Mercedes out of this as well.
Talk me through the side pods, because obviously we know that the underfloor tunneling is so important on these cars. So, the front of the floor edges and how that air is channeled under the car is very, very important. Ooh, big snap. But also how that air is channeled over the top of the car and over the side pods down towards, we're going to get the snap here. Oh, good catch from Pierre. Channeled down the side pods towards that beam wing at the back of the car. It's evident on the Ferrari, and we see it at other teams taking that influence. We see it on the Alpine now very much. We see it to an extent, I guess, on the Mercedes as well with those haunches, an alternative way of channeling that down because they don't have side pods to be able to channel the air down. The Red Bull, very, very different. In both cases, how are they getting that air channeled then towards the rear?
Well, one of the things I'll tell you when you look at a Formula One car, and you read a lot of articles saying they're channeling air to here, they're doing this, they're feeding that. If you give me both of these cars and a full-scale wind tunnel for an afternoon, I'll give you an exact answer. Or if you didn't want to do that, a slightly cheaper option is if both teams would send me a decent CAD model of the cars, I'll run some CFD on them and I'll give you a really good answer. What I can tell you about the Ferrari, because some students did it early last year, that they did some CFD work on the just overall shape of the Ferrari upper surface and the shape of that side pod, and it was shown to be a drag reduction device rather than a downforce generation device, which is a slightly different approach. And the fact we're seeing so many teams taking influence from those Ferrari side pods this year, as well as teams taking influence from the Red Bull side pods, very different approach again. And I can't say with great clarity what all of the airflow around the rear of the Red Bull is doing, because I haven't had a similar amount of aero data on that car. This approach from the Ferrari is just a much, much nicer sort of it's an easier thing to understand, basically. But it's crucial to say, underneath the side pods, there isn't very much. Now, you've got the normal cooling layout, you've got the radiators, you've got various gubbins and bits and pieces of power unit, the exhaust stacks and stuff like that. You've got panels you've got bodywork under the bodywork, which channels the air through the car and does quite a lot of clever things as well. And that's something that's not really talked very much about because it's really hard to see. But I was taking a look under the bodywork of the Red Bull last night. Huge amount of bodywork under the bodywork you can see. So they're really channeling the air through the car.
Hulkenberg over the line. And with the fastest time of the day, 1:33.3, with the fastest first sector. And he comes over the line to displace George Russell. And he's 3.5 tenths of a second ahead. And he did so on the C3 tyre. So lap count so far, 11 laps for Hulkenberg, 12 for Russell. There's 10 for Perez, 9 for Leclerc, and 7 for Gasly. Piastri putting time on the board good enough for 6th, and he finds himself with 9. And this is a replay of heading down to turn 10 with the current fastest driver.
Sniff of a lockup for Hulkenberg into turn 10. But he's actually still managed to get it in towards an apex, but that lockup just drifted him wide to the second layer of curbing there. And really, if you want perfect traction, you don't want to be on the curb on the exit of 10. The first bit of curb is maybe getawayable, but if you go to the second ridge, then you lose a bit of time. So a bit more in there for Nico Hulkenberg. He was also turning quite a lot coming through turn 9. Braking and cornering is what induces lockups typically. And he had a lot of steering angle on, which opens up turn 10. That's why he was trying to do it. But it's just a slightly different style. Let's ride on board with Oscar Piastri into the same area. Whoa, spin.
Oh, he's going to lose it. And we haven't seen much of that in testing as he goes down the hill to 10. Luckily, there's about a car park worth of runoff down there. Gathers it together, crucially keeps it out of the barrier. And that's about one of the only incidents we've seen in the entire 3 days where a driver has to catch it. And we were on board when he lost it down the
Final day, testing comes alive.
What an opportune moment to compare entries into turn 10 as well for Piastri. It looked like he was turning in an absolutely normal place. Did he just ride a little bit of a bump as he was coming through turn 9? Let's watch it again. Over the crest, you just got to slow it down through. Yeah, it's bumpy there. So it's just over the bumps there. The McLaren not riding it well, and the rear just snapping in an instant. He did quite well to get his bearings and carry on, but it was just the bumps. This circuit generally, the bumps are a little bit worse this year than last year. We spoke to Alex Albon yesterday, who was saying, it's just the track hasn't been resurfaced, and year on year it's getting a bit more aggressive. I do think the cars are running stiffer now as well, so they're really feeling it. We can see it a lot into turn 1, and for Piastri there, the car's running low, they're running stiff, and the bumps are making quite an impact there. And for Oscar, that was just what got away from him.
It's a replay of Nick de Vries watching the spin.
Our first spin in 3 days.
That's crazy, isn't it?
Absolutely wild consistency across the board, but you are seeing drivers pushing on the final day ahead of his debut, his first start, the Formula 3, the Formula 2 champion, and he had set a fastest first sector on before that happened. Down to the pit lane once again with Ted.
Thank you, Alex, where George Russell is in the garage, and quite a significant area of attention. Well, it's that front axle that we heard from the team yesterday, that they saw there was the mysterious loss of downforce, the loss of whether it was aero load or sort of mechanical grip from the front axle, amounted to the same thing. The front of the car was nowhere, and they didn't really know why. And I'm seeing large parts of this morning dedicated to Mercedes on the front suspension. You can see them at the moment looking not only at the middle third, the heave spring, which governs the amount of movement that the car just has vertically, just up and down, and then the torsion bars which do the lateral motion of the suspension from side to side. they're just trying all sorts on the front suspension. They've had a look at the front wing. That seems sound. The aerodynamicists have checked that everything is at the right angle and there's no flexing in any bits that there shouldn't be. So really, it's the front suspension that they're looking at. They would have stripped it down. The night shift would have been in to work all night, while these day mechanics would have gone home and had some rest. There are no curfews, of course, in testing. But yeah, there you can see the nose goes back on, and out they go. And assuming that was just a little error that they'll fix, we see the Flowviz, the aero paint, come out. You always know when they're putting down some drip mats, don't you guys? That there's about to be some aero paint that they don't want staining the garage floor. So they're going to actually do some now aero tests on whether the front airflow is going where they intend it to go, or whether there's something amiss aero-wise at the front. But yeah, they always work very hard, these teams, night shift and day shift. And just a sort of open question for you. I mean, are we in an area where Mercedes might not be the fastest Mercedes-powered team? Are we in an area where we might see Fernando Alonso beating Hamilton and George Russell in qualifying in Bahrain? What do you think?
I don't think it's a million miles off, Ted. I think that's a really good shout. From everything that we've seen, from the numbers we've heard, and from what appears to be correlating out on track, and what everyone's saying in the paddock, Aston look the real deal.
It seems twofold, isn't it? It's we're talking Aston and Mercedes because the Williams and the McLaren are both further back. So it's Aston moving forward, which they look like they've done tremendously over the winter, and Fernando's diving in well there. And Mercedes, they've moved back, I think, at this stage from where they finished last year, which they've made all that progress through the season, but now they're having more issues. See if they can get on top of this front axle and find the downforce today. But right now, they're having a really tricky test again.
Fastest in the first sector, fastest in the second sector. Sergio Perez coming to the final couple of corners on the racetrack and guiding his Red Bull through to cross the line and take the fastest time of the day by a tenth and a half.
Piastri just stuck at P3 as well. Well, it would have been P2 before Perez jumped up there on a 1:33.6. So clearly that spin hasn't dampened his confidence out on track.
Just to be that spoil sport that comes up every now and again and over a race weekend, and I can see Jolin's eyes are going to roll at this already. Track limits don't apply in testing. So I think there was a track limits breach there, but doesn't count.
I wonder why you were waving
Sam's
at me.
back. Sam's back. What are the speed traps, Sam?
I haven't got them.
Leslie, you always have the speed traps.
Okay, we don't have the speed traps, but we do have another comparison for Sam to pour over. So we will bring you, first of all, Sergio Perez diving down the hill. Then in a moment, we're going to compare the Mercedes and the Haas.
Yeah, I picked these two cars out.
I wondered why we were doing this.
I picked these cars out because they're so different.
Okay.
But we've already talked about the Ferrari concept, which the Haas uses very, very similarly. It uses so many components. But as we look at the front of the two cars, the VF23 Haas in the top and the W14 below, look at the front wings. It's not particularly clear here, but we did just get a look at it earlier on. Both of these teams have spent quite a lot of time and energy researching some quite clever front wing solutions. On the Mercedes, you can just see them ahead of the left front tyre there of George Russell's car. Two little winglets sticking out from the inside of the front wing end plate. The Haas, you can't really see it there because they're painted the same colour as a tyre. They have the same sort of thing, but the two plates point in completely different directions, and both teams are looking at the other team wondering which one of them's got it wrong. It could be the answer is neither of them, they're just doing different things, but the way they're working on those front wings is quite different. But when you start looking back over the car, this is where you start to really see conceptual differences between the Mercedes and, well, pretty much everything else. While the Haas has that Ferrari side pod concept we were talking about before, you can see those side pod ducts looking pretty normal. As the cars come around, take a look at the shape of the Mercedes side pod. Mercedes are using some clever cooling technology. You can see it really clearly at this point. Look, there's a conventional side pod duct above the Palm Angels logo on the Haas, that big rounded scoop, pretty much what you saw in the F1 show cars. Where you look at the Mercedes, that side pod barely exists. It's just a oblong slot sticking up. The bit that sticks out above it, which is actually quite an interesting and originally quite controversial part of the car, is actually this upper side impact structure. Every single car on the grid has two identical triangular carbon fiber parts molded to the side of the chassis for when the driver hits a wall, they should protect the driver. Those side impact structures have to be mounted in particular positions, and they have to be, each car has to have them, they're all particular size. Mercedes, when they shrunk down their side pods, they couldn't get rid of that side impact structure, so they had to have it dangling around quite high in the air. Haas, with a conventional side pod, didn't have to do that. So Mercedes mounted their wing mirror on it, and that was quite clever. But the overall concept, as we roll forward through the car, you start to see some massive differeces. Ferrari have got their own direction of the side pod, and Haas have copied it for obvious reasons. But look at Mercedes. You've got that massive lump on the team viewer logo, that big section there. Now, I think that section above the team viewer, with that deep dished section underneath. Now, underneath that big lump of bodywork, there's absolutely nothing. I've had a good look at the car. There are no mechanical components on that. That is just pure bodywork where the paint starts. And that was inspired, I believe, by the shape that Ferrari introduced on the F175 that's inspired the side pods on the Haas. So they're doing the same sort of thing. But look here at the floor detailing. You can see some really different approaches there. Mercedes at the bottom, just on the bottom right of the screen, you can see a little silver section with little bridge sections. That's got a legality string on it, and that's really neat. Whereas the Haas is far, far more simple in terms of the overall floor. But Haas has got a bigger wind tunnel allocation than Mercedes. So I think you're going to get a little bit more. So these two cars, I think, comparing and contrasting the two of those two cars, is some of the most interesting things you can do. But it's mainly because Mercedes has taken such an individual route to Formula One car design.
Excellent stuff, Sam. From the knowledge of Sam Collins to the knowledge of Jolyon Palmer. George Russell has got the C4 tyres on. Talk us around the lap, Jolyon.
Here we go then. Let's see what he can do over the bumps. Mercedes not porpoising nearly so much as they were last year. Generally happier with the car, but missing some balance and missing some front downforce, as we just heard from Ted yesterday. So they're trying to make up for a bit of time, and that looked pretty good through the first sector for George on the C4s, as you mentioned, which I think might be the first time that Mercedes have put on the C4s or C5s so far this test. So a bit more grip out there for Russell. He's half a second up on Perez. So this is looking like more of a performance run then for George, as you'd expect with those Red Bull tyres. Out to the curb on entry. Hamilton was going a lot further on entry yesterday. Oscar Piastri spin corner, and Russell going way wider than Piastri was, so avoiding those bumps. And maybe that's why Hülkenberg was actually doing the big wide line as well. Piastri not, and was caught out earlier on. Looking pretty hooked up. The juice of the softer tyre now for Russell, and he's able to get through these corners with better traction, minimal steering input to get through. A little bit of touching of the floor, but flat out through turn 12 into 13. Tricky corner over the brow, and now the rear's getting a little bit loose. You can feel the wind affecting the car a little more through 13 as well as you come over the crest. Long run to the final corner, big stamp on the brakes, hook up an apex. If you don't, you're going to be drifting wide over that curb, which you don't really want to take at first. Looks a good lap from George on the soft. Is he going to put the cat amongst the pigeons? 31.7, almost the fastest lap of the week, but he's 1/10 down on what Zhou and Verstappen did yesterday. But that's a good lap actually at this time on the C4. So Mercedes may be getting a little happier.
Yeah, if you consider the time of day, 1:31.707 for George Russell, fastest in all three sectors on the by some margin on his 15th lap of the day, and that will momentarily, I think, put a smile on the face down there as they search for answers coming out of day 2 into day 3. And if you consider the time of day and the track conditions, of course, we'll be qualifying under the floodlights for the Grand Prix next week. That's a tidy lap from George Russell.
It's come a bit from nowhere as well, hasn't it? Because normally when you go on to a C4 or maybe you'll move on to a C5 this morning, you sort of run through a bit of a program of a tyre sweep. But that's George been in the garage for a while. We saw the Flovis going on the front wing with Ted a few moments ago. They were looking at the front suspension. Then he's just come out, bolted on some softer tyres, and out of nowhere has done a very competitive lap. So Mercedes will have known what they were capable of for the last couple of days. I have to say, looking trackside, the car has seemed much more of a handful. Both drivers have been fighting at the wheel more than that of the Red Bull or the Ferrari. Bolt on the soft tyres, and apart from that turn 13 couple of corrections, it looked much better there.
Just got a little view at one of the big talking points of this week in testing, and that's actually been from inside the Mercedes garage. Jerome D'Ambrosio, former F1 driver, who is by Toto Wolff's side, has been all the way through the week. Big rumours he'll find himself in some form of a management position at Mercedes. Of course, was alongside Susie Wolff at Venturi in Formula E, ended up as the team principal there before it sort of morphed itself into Maserati this year, with James Rossiter taking over at the helm. But yeah, good to see Jerome back in the paddock. And if rumours are to be believed, he will be announced fairly shortly at Mercedes.
You know, as pre-season testing goes, that it's been a bit of a slow news week. One of the big talking points is Jerome D'Ambrosio watching with Toto Wolff for the week. But he's a very astute former driver, I think, Jerome.
I like the fact that he's taken fashion tips today, seemingly from Ayrton Senna. Sort of peak 1988 Senna fashion vibes coming off Jerome D'Ambrosio today. I'm hoping he's wearing a pair of Todds.
Nick de Vries is on his way for his personal best of the day so far in an AlphaTauri that the team don't seem overly thrilled by. De Vries and Tsunoda vying for the team leader position. The experienced De Vries, world champion in other categories. And the time with the team of Yuki Tsunoda, who begins his third season with the team. That's his personal best, but he remains in 9th position.
So De Vries looks like he's on a different run plan to a lot of those out there. It's straight into a longer run. C3 tyre. He had done a lap on the C4, but that was, I think, the used C4 that he had on at the end of yesterday. So it was a slow sighter on a grippier but used soft tyre. So De Vries propping up the times at the moment, but into a long run. And then maybe he'll get another shot before lunchtime, and he gives the car back to Yuki for this evening.
Mick Schumacher in the background there, the reserve driver for Mercedes, been talking about being integrated with the team, and over the shoulder of Toto Wolff down there.
We haven't seen anything from Williams today. Albon is out on track. He hasn't done a lap time, but he's done 15 laps. So they're obviously in a bit of a research morning so far, coming up to the end of the first hour. A lot of ins and outs. Some data gathering over at Williams. And then we saw yesterday morning Logan Sargent doing some decent lap times, quite impressive, on the soft tyre. And I imagine they're going to put Albon onto a similar run program. So I imagine that they'll give Albon a bit of a crack in the next couple of hours at some softer tyres. See how that goes. And here he is. What tyres is he on out the blocks? He's on some softer tyres straight away.
Look at these stats there at the bottom of the screen as well. The points finishes. All Williams drivers last year scoring a personal best of 9th. Nick de Vries doing that on one appearance. Nicholas Latifi departing the team, and Alex Albon with the 3 top 10 finishes.
It's a nice little stat.
It's a great stat.
There we are. Well, winding up to the start of the year with some stats coming out towards the start of the year.
And good vibes down at Williams. They've had a good test so far, 2 good days. Talking about them in the paddock this morning, somebody cruelly said, well, it was a fairly low bar for Williams to have had a better test. And that, while that is true, there is a real level of, I'm not going to say satisfaction, but cautious optimism that it has gone well. They haven't experienced any major issues. General and genuine happiness down there at the moment.
Still on an interesting run program here with Albon. I thought he was maybe going to go in for a fast lap there on a C4, but looks like he's just done a lap that's 1 minute 40, so a high fuel level of pace, but fairly cruisy. And now he's a bit of weaving, bit of stuff going on a slow lap, running to a program I'm sure set by his engineers, and looks strange from the outside. There must be some data they want to get from that exuberant weaving coming out of turn 3.
We're on board with Sergio Perez. He set his personal best time on the C3 tyre, as you can see from the timing tower on the left-hand side. All apart from Albon in 10th, and Russell at the top have done the same thing. Leclerc on the C2 in the middle there. But cars out on track. We have De Vries, we have Albon, we have Perez, everyone else in the pits, including Valtteri Bottas and Will's favourite helmet
love
in the
that
field.
lid. I want him to keep it for the whole season. I also like that Tiffany's managed to get away with giving him something of a receding hairline. We've seen it's halfway back on the top of the helmet.
Probably only she.
Only she could get away with that. It is a brilliant. I love it. It's not the new side of Valtteri. It's the old side of Valtteri back again. It's the Valtteri that we knew coming up through the junior formulas, his early years at Williams. It's wonderful to see him racing with joy again. And he said throughout last season he was in the best place, not just of his career but of his life. Happy in the car, happy out of the car, and it shows. It's just lovely to see Valtteri in such a good, happy space. Former
Williams driver, and Ed has wandered down to the team that we were discussing just a few moments ago.
Ah, yes, but have you spotted the omission on the Valtteri Bottas mullet facial helmet? There is the omission, I can't see it, the emblem of the Lucky Cross of Nastola, his hometown in Finland.
Sell online
I had
and
a look
grow
at the
your
version they
business
brought out the
with
back of the
Wix
garage,
e-commerce.
guys, and fans
Create a
of
beautiful store.
Students of Valtteri Bottas helmet designs over the years might see there's always been the blue cross of Nastola on it, but I don't believe this one has it. By the way, have you seen the negative space 77 in the Valtteri Bottas logo? That's something to look out
Learning
for.
a lot about this helmet design.
Are we saying that Valtteri's moving away from his Finnish roots this year?
No,
He's abandoned the Lucky
I haven't
Cross.
seen the Lucky Cross, the blue cross of Nastola. I'm sure he's not moving away from his Finnish roots.
He's embracing a lot of Australian culture, though, isn't he?
He is.
Really
Seems to love it
enjoying the
over there.
Australian winter.
the mullet, the barbecues, the beer.
Yeah.
Well, only because
He's had a
there's
good
a beer
winter.
with his initials.
With his
VB.
initials,
Is there
yeah.
a JP? Is there a JP beer or a WB beer or an AJ beer?
No JP
No.
beer.
No. Okay.
And I've searched long and hard, to be honest.
He's going to have to do a home brew.
Yeah.
Valtteri has his own
So let
gym
me-
now as well.
He does. He does. So let me tell you what's going on at Williams, just before I let you get on with it. And they have done, nearly 20 laps on the board, but most of them have been, the majority of them have been through the pits. I think he did complete that one lap while you were watching him, but they're just doing a few final short runs, very short runs, not really performance runs, but stuff they need to get through. And you can see the engineers in the central panel of the Williams garage down here, as going through the list of stuff they have to do. Lots of points of things that need ticked off. James Unwin's engineer with the sort of greying temples, and a performance engineer just downstream of that, talking to Alex, just wanting to get through everything they need to. I'm actually seeing no sign of Nico Hülkenberg. The Haas seems to be in the garage with not much going on to it at the moment. I'll follow that up a little bit later. But yeah, Hülkenberg, an ex-Williams driver himself. But I've got to say there's a positive feeling down here. It's hard to know where Williams are. Are they around the Haas mark? Are they around the AlphaTauri mark? I think they probably are. I think on a good day, when Alex has got the wind beneath his wings or up his sails or whatever you want to say, he'll be easily into Q2. But that is going to be quite close. It's really closing up down here in the sort of lower half of the midfield.
Excellent news. Competitive as we want. So mention of Haas there from Ted, and we can now go down to Laura Winter, who's by Haas, down in the paddock. Or coming to us.
Very short runs, not really performance runs,
yes,
but
I'm enjoying
stuff
most
they
of
need
Verona
to
here.
get through. And you
We've
can
just
see
heard
the
there
engineers in the
that
central
Nico Hülkenberg's
panel
not in the
of
car.
the
You're saying
Wil-
that's a scheduled break ahead of his next run.
Yeah, we are preparing for the next run, and we are
get through.
we are going through the
You can
program.
see
Now
the
we
engineers in the
started
central
having
panel
some
of the
setup work on the car, and then we are moving to a different program with our fuel.
Nice stuff. Very, very good. And Ted mentioning there in the pit lane how close, how tight the midfield is looking to be for this season. I know Gunther Steiner said that yesterday as well. What are your thoughts on how it's all going to stack up through 2023?
It's very difficult to say because everyone is running different program at different time with different tires, so very difficult to comment. But it looks definitely, that everything seems a little bit more closer than last year, so it's going to be even more exciting for all the fans from home and on the track to follow the races.
Yeah, I'm hoping so, very much. And I know coming into this season, the 2022 Haas car has, in your words, been entirely reworked. Just talk me through the development of your 23 Challenger.
Yeah, I suppose 2022 was a very big departure from previous year in terms of regulation. So there was a lot of work to do. And, when you do everything new from scratch, you learn things when doing things. So it was a unique chance to redo everything for 23 and trying to improve everything. So it was a lot of work. The car maybe doesn't look radically different, but in reality is quite different in many areas.
I asked how your winter was and if you'd had any time off just before this interview, and you said, not really. I guess that's where the bulk of your work is really focused on, is getting ready for it to be launched out on track here. Yeah,
I suppose, the Formula One is changing in these years with so many races, and there's a lot of overlap between the development in season and a new car, etc. So basically, there's never time to rest. You always push very hard through the season, and then you work on the new car, etc. But it's quite nice. It keeps you, always motivated and, always busy. So there's not much time to rest.
F1 just does not stop, does it? Let's talk about the rest of today, this afternoon as well. We're hoping to see a bit more performance running. What are your expectations? What are your hopes? Where do you hope to finish come the end of today?
Well, I suppose our objective was always to run as much as possible, put the mileage on the car, learn reliability, learn all the new systems. So, now we are approaching the last day and we are approaching the race next week. So I suppose we'll try to do some work more, in view of the race. So we run lighter fuel in the afternoon, some long run with high fuel, and try to be ready for the first race.
And how's the feedback been as well from Nico and Kevin? And indeed, how's Nico settling in and enjoying working with you guys for his new team?
I guess it's a very positive start. There's a lot of good mood in the team and in the garage with engineers. So we are learning to work with Nico. We are working very well with Kevin. They are both learning the new car. I think it's a very positive mood and, a good, probably a good ground to build something good.
I'm sure you're going to say it is too early to tell, because that's what every single team principal and driver is saying to me so far. But I've got to ask, where do you think Haas will be in the pecking order through the first three races?
Surprise, surprise. It's too early. It's too early to say anything. No, I suppose it's very difficult, as I mentioned before, because everyone is running a different program and everything looks so close. So I suppose, it'd be nice to be there in the middle and fighting for good points from the beginning. That would be really a good objective.
Absolutely. Wish you all the best. Thank you very much, Simone. Back to you guys in commentary.
Thank you very much, Laura. So Haas giving nothing away, no one is, but they do not seem unhappy as George Russell continues with the fastest first sector. He's completing a lap which looks like it might be an improvement. He remains on the C4 tyre, Joe.
As George Russell C5 tyre, this one.
With the fastest
I believe softer compound for George, and it looked better as well through turn 13. So he's just fractionally up through both the first two sectors, and now into the final corner for George, and it looks better as well. Maybe starting to overheat those rear tyres, slightly scrabbling coming out of there, but this is going to go even quicker, and it does. No personal best in the final sector for him, maybe just slightly losing the rears on the C5, which is softer than we will have for the race next week. But Mercedes, guys, have hit the top of the times. C5 tyre.
Indeed, the C5 tyre that takes him a little bit further. No improvement in that final sector. And completely pushing to the very edge, but still. George Russell doing a little bit of performance in an unfashionable time of day to be doing so, which we can get on the final day of testing. And we have 3 hours and 6 minutes to go in this morning session. Delighted to say that we've been joined by Lawrence Barretto. It's a very, very busy morning on track. It's a very busy morning in the commentary box. We're getting through the whole team up here.
Oh, that's brilliant. Thanks for squeezing me in, Alex.
Always a pleasure to see you, Lawrence. Okay, so we always seem to come to you for the mood because you're always speaking.
A man of the vibe.
The man who just takes the pulse of the paddock. I like to say.
What have I got for you?
What have you got? It's that terrible lead-in, right?
So I had a few of us had breakfast with Gunter Steiner this morning.
And always fun.
He's always good value. So he has an espresso, always a single espresso, and everyone else is eating and tucking in essentially. Probably gives media types a bad name, doesn't it? Really. But he was in as good a form as ever, and I think that's partially because they're really happy within the team about how preparations have gone. He didn't say this explicitly, but others in the team have said that this is the best pre-season that Haas have had since they got into Formula One.
Wow.
And that's from everything from the production of the car and the car build and the quality and hitting all the targets and being able to bring things forward so they can be ahead of the game. We just heard from Serena Resta there. He's settled in the team now. He's built the technical team that he wants there. Gene, he was saying he talked to Gene for 15 minutes every day at the end of the day just to kind of give him an update about what's happening, and he's really happy with the progress the team are making, because at the end of the day it's of course his money that he's plowing into the team. But they're generally really happy with how things are going, especially, Gunter was saying, with how Nico's settled in at the team. He didn't say he was surprised at how he settled in, but was saying that he's really come in, plugging himself straight in, and that experience is already showing through.
It's their best ever driver lineup for Haas. In the history of Haas Formula One team, this is their best lineup, I would say. I mean, K-Mag's been an integral part, really. Roman Grosjean and Magnussen. I guess the other competitor, maybe Magnussen and Schumacher. But I think Hulkenberg is largely considered to be probably the more established option if he can settle in properly, having had those years out. And yeah, this is my opinion, but in my opinion, it's their strongest lineup. And why they'll be smiling is because it does sound like Nico's hungry for it. He settled in really well, and that was, I guess, the one slight question mark about bringing him back. Having he thought he was out of it, bringing back a driver that's moving to his mid-30s, and he's still got the hunger and he's settling in well.
Are you saying this because they're both former teammates?
They're both terrific.
Right. These guys are world beaters.
Yeah.
I mean, these guys are untouchable.
Put them in the Mercedes and the Red Bull, and they would be up the road. Who'd be a teammate to? No, I do think they're both great guys and fast drivers, fundamentally, so they should work together well. And I think Haas, I mean, the car looks decent, as you say, and the fact that Hulkenberg's settling in well, it's very encouraging. So it sounds like the vibe check is positive.
The vibe check is back. It has been reintroduced. And where's the vibe check not so happy?
You can't use it. You get no info about it, and you're on the back foot. So that's the danger of bringing new parts to circuits where incident can happen, let alone just being a bit of an outlier for the rest of it. Here we go, George Russell on board. Another set of C5s, really running through the softer tyres this morning, Mercedes, finding some performance. He's gone top for the week so far, and he's got some grip now coming out of turn 2, flat out, accelerating, trying to pick a break point for turn 4. And we'll get a first sector split just in a minute. Yeah, no correction at the wheel on the edge there as well. And when you come over the crest, that's quite easy to do. So the rear of the Mercedes working much more nicely in these soft tyres. Little fight of the wheel into turn 8. Got to be careful not to overheat them in this temperature. This is not the conditions they'll be running the soft tyres, of course, next week when it's all under darkness for qualifying. Fastest in the first sector. Slightly more twitchy through the middle part of the lap. Oh, he was early to gas through turn 11 there. A little bit hesitant to commit fully, but he was picking it up quite early there. Was George. He's lost a little bit of time in the middle sector with just a couple of corrections at the wheel. Through turn 13. And now just over the crest and down towards the final big braking zone. Understeering actually a little bit towards the apex, then he ran out of road towards the exit and just had to fight the wheel, but it's still the fastest final sector of the day so far, and he improves his time by a 10th.
So correction into turn 8. It hasn't gone through 13 particularly happy so far. Hearing skipping over the bumps on the final straight before final 2 corners of 14 and 15, but fastest time of the day so far?
Well, it looks much more poised. The corrections are small now for the Mercedes. When I was out there watching, and it's always going to happen when you bolt on a soft tyre. Your balance is going to come together because the grip level just comes up and it can mask deeper problems. But it looks generally more poised. The correction at turn 8 at the apex was subtle. It wasn't a big armful of opposite lock. It was just a slight hover.
Like we saw with Hamilton yesterday.
Yeah.
In big corrections, really pronounced, really obvious, even if you weren't watching on board.
Exactly. Here it's just subtle, just changes at the wheel. And he had the same into turn 10. 11, wanted the throttle very early, got half of it, but couldn't quite slam the right foot down the whole way. So had to just hesitate slightly. And then 13, if you've got a car pinned through 13, then you really are hooked up, because it's the corner where you're towards the end of the lap, the rear tyres are getting a bit warm. And again, the wind's always just catching you as you're turning, arcing through that right-hander. Overall, it looks like it's in a better place than Mercedes. And of course, the soft tyres are helping that no end. But I'd say they're having a much better morning.
Okay, Charles Leclerc popped up to second position, but he's still running on a harder compound of tyre compared to George Russell. I'm delighted to say that we can now bring in another Williams driver. Yesterday it was Alex Albon. Today we can go downstairs to the hospitality area and speak to Logan Sargent, who is gearing up to make his Formula One debut. And there he is, with slightly more people around him than Alex had yesterday. So already winning friends and influencing people. Logan, great to speak to you. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you. How's it going today?
It is going very well. It's a wonderful view from this commentary box. But more importantly, how are you finding life behind the wheel of what your teammate called the 45?
Yeah, the FW45 has been it's been a pleasure to drive the last 2 days. I think we're still chasing some things, trying to find some answers, but I think as a whole, it's been a really productive test. We've been moving in the right direction, and it's all been going very well.
It's nice to see you somewhat more relaxed than you were the last time you were on our screens in Abu Dhabi, trying to secure those super license points. I don't think you want to hear the phrase super license ever again, do you, after what you had to go through at the end of the year?
I don't think I'm going to need to at this point. But yeah, I mean, I feel like I'm in a really relaxed place. I feel super at home with the team, and just been going through the motions of the test, and I feel like I've been getting really comfortable in the car, and that's all I can ask for, and super excited to carry it through into race 1.
Logan, you completed so many laps yesterday. We were talking about nearly 3 Grand Prix distances. How are you feeling today, and are you still pleased with the efforts yesterday?
Yeah, I think you know, I think the amount of work I put in through the off season has really showed. You know, previously I wouldn't have been able to physically do that, and you know, a lot of hours in the gym prepping for the season, and you know, I think to complete 154 laps in a day, and to be honest, I feel nearly 100% today is a testament to the hard work we've done, and I think that puts me in a really good mindset and gives me confidence going into the season.
Wow, 3 race distances, and you're feeling good still today. Happy days. What's going on now today? What's your plan look like?
Well, I have a lot of media commitments today, but no, I'm going to do my best to sort of just really have a look through what's gone down the last 2 days and see what we can do better, where I can improve, where we can improve in terms of getting the car in a better window, and then try to learn as much as I can from Alex. Obviously, he's in the car today, you know, on a similar run plan to me yesterday, and I think, you know, he's great to have him in the car today, and he's going to keep building on what we did yesterday. And yeah, I'll just stay on top of what the team is doing and what direction they're moving in.
You mentioned Alex. He's a terrifically nice guy outside of the car. What's he like behind the scenes? Tell us what your impressions of him as a teammate, first of all, as you gear up to make your debut.
Well, I think firstly, he's, you know, a very honest and an open teammate, which as a rookie is sort of anything you can ask for. But I mean, not to mention, he's a great person to work with, and I mean, he's extremely fast, extremely you know, precise, and a great driver, and he has experience that I can lean on and learn from. So I think as a rookie coming into the sport, it's pretty much the ideal spot for me.
How's your feedback comparing? Are you writing the same notes at the end of getting in the same car as well?
I think generally, you know, we're more or less experiencing the same limitations. I think, you know, as we know, Bahrain is extremely wind sensitive. These cars are wind sensitive, so it's about, you know, not getting lost in that. But the main limitations have been more or less the same, which is positive because we can move in the same direction.
Logan, there's no reason to suggest that you wouldn't complete the season at all, but when you do complete the season, you're going to be the first American full-timer in Formula One since 2006. That's been an enormous point of pride for you.
It is, for sure. I think, you know, it's just the trust that, you know, Williams has put in me in the last year and a half, 2 years now has been absolutely, you know, vital, and has given me such a feeling of confidence. And, you know, I'm like I said, I'm very relaxed, and, you know, I go into the season knowing I have a lot to learn. I have to adapt to a car that, you know, every car needs to be driven a bit differently, and it's going to take a bit of time, but you know, they just, like I said, I feel at home, and you know, I really feel like I can get my feet under the table and start making progress.
Logan, you got 3 home races this year. Pretty cool for your first season in Formula One, and Formula One's growing continuously in America. What's the kind of feeling for you as the American driver in F1?
I mean, not many people have ever had 3 Grand Prix at their home venue, I guess. You know, Miami's on my back door. I'm gonna have so many friends and family there. It's gonna be a special one for me. Gives me a chance for 3 special helmet designs, so that should be good. And yeah, I think, you know, I think just to be able to feel that home atmosphere, that home crowd energy, is something that's gonna be special to experience. And you know, I want to make sure they're 3 of my best.
I'm jealous of that. Silverstone was always great. One home race, everyone's there, and they're nicely enough spread out as well. Miami in May, and then when your friends and family want another trip out, you got a choice of Austin or Vegas. What a choice!
For some reason, I feel like they've done that pretty tactically to spread them out over the year. I feel like you know, that gives people the opportunity to get to more than one, and yeah, I think that was a pretty good idea.
We've seen whilst we're chatting, Leclerc's gone to the top of the times, by the way, in the Ferrari on a C4 tyre. There's been a big rear wing assembly change going on at Aston Martin. Are you keeping tabs on what's going on outside of Williams, or are you just solely focused on what you're doing in the car and what Alex is doing? How's it going for your competitors, do you think?
honestly, I haven't paid too much attention to it. I've had a busy last 2 days, as you can imagine, but I'll look into it a little bit more today. I've been more focused on what we're doing here as a team and what direction we're moving in and where we need to go. But yeah, I'll take a better look today.
Logan, I've been fortunate to commentate on you in Formula 3 and Formula 2. For those of our viewers who are meeting you for the first time, can you give us a summary of the roller coaster journey you've been on to get to Formula 1?
Oh man, where to start? I mean, it's been so up and down. I've had great years. I've had tough years. There were at the end of 2020. I thought, it was pretty much over for the F1 dream. And Williams came along, gave me hope, gave me an opportunity, and we were able to perform well in Formula 2, and here we are. I just think one thing it taught me is even when you feel down and out, don't give up, keep working at it, and if you work hard enough, your chance will come.
And you have plenty of experience of racing Mr. Piastri, who's going to be making his debut at the same Grand Prix as you. You put on a fantastic show in 2020, and finding yourself making your debut, potentially you're going to have Felipe Drugovich as well. It's everyone's taking a step up.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's great to see to be racing with Oscar again. I mean, we've been teammates probably 3 or 4 times over the course of our careers, and we've always been super close and had this quite a big rivalry, but it's always been a healthy rival, and we're still friends, and it's gonna be awesome to go into our debut weekend together, and hopefully we can have a good race.
Well, these are special moments for you, Logan. As you said, the racing dream, it didn't look very likely when you didn't progress up to Formula 2 that you were going to make it here. So enjoy every moment of it. You've earned it, my friend, and go well making your Grand Prix debut in a week's time.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it, and I'll be doing my best.
Logan Sargent, Williams driver, is going to get on with more media appearances. Could you tell the enthusiasm in his voice when he said that earlier on? But a terrific chap, and you could sense a quiet confidence there, and he's relaxed, and great he could join us on the headset.
Absorbing Formula One life. That's basically what it's all about. A long day in the car. I'm really impressed there. 154 laps. That is almost 3 race distances. And he's feeling fine today, which is, as a rookie to jump in, and testing mileage has been so huge this year. The reliability of the cars has been incredible. So to go through that and feel okay is one thing. Now he's learning the media side of things as well, which is it all. Even on your day off, there's plenty to do, especially as a rookie. Everyone wants to get to know you. There's a lot of story to tell, really. So taking it all in, I'd say he's had a pretty decent first test.
I think this is one of the benefits maybe of when you're part of a driver academy. You get exposed to a lot of these things very early on, and so Logan's been at Williams now for a couple of years, kind of as an involvement in various roles, and the team have really kind of tried their best to embed him inside the team. He spent a lot of time at the factory, at the racetrack, and that's offered him the opportunity that when he's been able to step up, he can kind of take it a little bit more in his stride. And I've really noticed a big difference in him since he first came in, and I did my first interview with him in Austin 2 years ago, to now. He's almost like a different character, and I think that's just the confidence that he's been able to build up until that point. All those FP1s the team gave him, I think it's a really good build up into Formula One, given the fact that the best thing would be testing. So the next best thing is everything else that Williams have tried to do for him.
Yeah, and showing the commitment to their driver program as well, making sure he was promoted. There were other options. There were the more experienced options for Williams, but they've decided to go with Logan Sargent, driver from their academy, to promote him. The driver who finished 3rd in the Formula 3 Championship in 2020 doesn't tell the full story. If he'd got to turn 5 of Mugello, he was the favourite to win that title. Who was he racing that year? The very highly rated Teo Porcher, and man making his debut a couple of garages down, Oscar Piastri. Didn't have the funding in 2021 to go straight up to Formula 2. Had to have that frustration that, say, an Esteban Ocon knows very well, of having gone toe-to-toe with a driver, And then suddenly they get promoted. Ocon beat Max Verstappen to the European Formula 3 Championship. Verstappen elevated straight to Formula 1. Ocon had to go sideways to GP3. So Sargent goes through that. He doesn't let his shoulders drop. He goes and fights with an unfancied team. He scores their first victory. Shrews, their first victory. He scored for the team, finished 7th, but it's that 7th place that kept him in the game. From that point, Williams got involved. They took him to Carlin. Carlin took him to Formula 1, and now he's in the Williams, ready to make a Grand Prix debut. We won't forget Alexander Rossi as well, who was the last American to take part in a Grand Prix. He had 5 races at the back end of 2015. So Sargent's journey, not a straightforward one, but they never really are. You don't always hear it, but he's got a nice, obvious roller coaster time up to Formula 1.
He's really had to fight for it. I think there have been moments where he wasn't quite sure what was going to happen, and that was almost through no fault of his own, really. But then here's a perfect example. If you're in the right place at the right time and you've shown that you've got the ability to step it up, you're going to get an opportunity. And, you know, when the door opened at Williams, he stepped into it. And I'll be honest, I don't think he thought that was going to be the case at the start of the year. He was planning his second year in F2. And that would have made a massive, you know, difference to the way he prepared for that first year. He would have kind of approached it and let's just take this first year slowly, steadily, try and make improvements and then really nail it in F2 for year 2. And then suddenly, the carrot on an F1 drive was hanging in the window. And he dealt with that pressure really well. Because you know what Williams basically said to him? You've got it if you get the super license, boys.
Yes.
You know, think of the pressure that puts that in. And when you have that on your shoulders and to then go out and do your job, and you're changing the way you're going racing then, aren't you? Because you're kind of protecting your position.
You're saying to a driver to turn off the instinct they've had since they first sat in a car, and he was a karting world champion as well. Very difficult to turn it off like a light switch, but he was having to back out of 50-50 moves, and then you just don't know whether that's going to completely unravel when you're not driving naturally. Anyway, it all worked out. It's all fine. When you were saying that, Lawrence, I was thinking Charles Leclerc's on a fast lap, which we're following at the moment, fastest in the first sector, as he continues in the Ferrari, fastest in the second sector as well, and using all of the curb and a bit more. He's going to complete the lap, and he's going to hope to go even further in front of the rest of the field. Could have been in a totally different grid. There's an alternative reality where it looks completely different. Everyone's in different seats. Either way, we've got a fantastic grid for Formula 1 in 2023. We've got Charles Leclerc with the fastest time of the day so far, set on the C4 tyres. It's a 1:31.0.
I'm liking it today. Everyone's just turning up the wick a little bit more. We're seeing more potential. Here comes Sergio Perez on a C3 tyre then in the Red Bull, 2.5 down on Leclerc. Still plenty more to come from that car today. But Checo's in the car the whole day, whereas Leclerc and Russell will be hopping out in 2 hours, 38 minutes. Do you want a couple of, in fact, I'll tell you in a minute, a couple of nuggets of information.
Oh, I look forward to that.
Give you a little teaser.
We're teeing up what's to come. Still to come. Jolyon Palmer's pace stats. But first, we journey to the final corners of the racetrack where Sam Collins is standing by.
Well, I decided not to go to the final corner itself because Jolyon Palmer, myself, yourself, and Will Buxton on the way into the track this morning decided to talk about high speeds of the cars. And you know I like a top speed of a car. Well, I decided to come down to the straight before the final corner of the track. And I wanted to see if we are going to see any evidence of aquatic marine life, by which I mean porpoising. So the next car we're going to see coming through here will be Pierre Gasly. Now, I think he's on quite a slow run, so we're not going to be particularly seeing that porpoising or that bouncing characteristic. So he won't be building up speed fully until he comes back past. Here you can see he's just running offline in the Alpine, trying to get a bit of heat into the tyres there. But when the cars, there's one car I particularly want to look at is Valtteri Bottas, because I've been watching for a little while, and that I can tell you now that Alfa Romeo is porpoising quite significantly at this section of track. But it's the only car that I've really seen doing it. And this is something that anyone who's watched the Drive to Survive, for example, which came out, I think last night, you can see a really good episode about how that's being dealt with. So we've got Valtteri Bottas now coming out of the penultimate corner. You'll see him coming over the crest. Now watch the rear wing of the Alfa Romeo here. You can just see it hopping up and down a little bit before the Finnish driver gets on the brakes and turns into the final corner. You can see that. Now the Red Bull nor the Ferrari's going quite slow actually. The Red Bull wasn't on full speed either there. Neither of them I've seen doing it even when they are on fast laps. But at this point on the circuit, it's a really good place to stand to have a good close look at how the cars are performing at high speed. Nick de Vries in the AlphaTauri, I believe, is going to be coming out of that corner next. I'm not quite sure how far away he is. Just can't see around corners. Here he comes over the crest, full speed. No, see, absolutely no sign of that porpoising that's so clear on the rear of the Alfa Romeo. So AlphaTauri seem to have that problem in hand. Now, the speeds of the cars, the weight of the cars, so the Alfa Romeo has been out for quite a long time, could have quite a heavy fuel load. That pushes the car down. Full fuel tank, car's heavier, sits closer to the road. Then you can get closer to that porpoising characteristic. Maybe some of these other cars are running with slightly lighter fuel loads going for lap times. That will make a difference as well. Maybe they sit the car up a little bit higher, but maybe they've adjusted the suspension to go lower. But only car we've seen really struggling with that is the Alfa Romeo. And I'm a bit surprised by that because we did see great pace from the Alfa Romeo last night with the other driver, Zhou Guanyu, having a really quick lap later in the session. And a few more cars going out of the pits I can hear behind me, just waiting for the next few cars to come through. But along this section of track, the cars are doing 300, coming up to 320 kph, nearly 200 miles an hour. Alex Albon coming through in the Williams. This is a slowish lap. As you can see, he's backing off to build up a lap in the Williams. Going to look at this. Here comes Bottas again, though, in the Alfa Romeo. And once again, yeah, the car is hopping around at peak speed. Now, let's see how the Alpine handles this. Now, Gasly's got up to full speed in that French car. No, he's not. He's still weaving his tyres, trying to get some tyre temperature. So maybe that lap went a bit wrong. He's building up. We'll have a look at him next time by. It's really interesting to understand what the differences are between the philosophies of the cars to avoid the porpoising, because you've got that crest of the hill just there. And I think there's a little bump just there, and it's provoking some cars. So let's have a look at the AlphaTauri here. Just smooth as you like over there. Full speed, no worries for that Honda-powered car. Nick de Vries is really enjoying that. But some of the cars, I think, are being provoked by that crest and a little bit of a bump. This Greywack aggregate has been imported from Shropshire in England. And we were trying to work out the last time this circuit was resurfaced, and it was quite a long time ago. We're not even sure it's ever been resurfaced. It's just a very good surface, but it is getting a bit bumpy. Now let's look at the Ferrari over the crest. Doesn't look to be a very quick run. No, it is quite quick, but just again, no sign of porpoising on that car either. And to avoid that porpoising characteristic that the FIA saw and didn't like, and we all saw last year, the sides of the cars have been raised by 15 millimeters, the width of the average finger. And they've changed the diffuser slightly, and there's a few other things. Now, the next car we're going to see coming through is Alex Albon. That's the Williams. It's the first time we've seen this car at full speed. Now, let's watch him over the crest. Watch the rear wing. No porpoising there. The Red Bull going very slowly. Not really worth talking about. He's coming very slowly, building up for the start of the lap. Now, here's Bottas again. He's, again, hopping around at the rear. The Alfa Romeo have got a problem there. Now, let's have the Alpine full speed. No problem for Alpine. So the only car that we're seeing really porpoising, the only aquatic marine life, is coming to you with the Italian branded Swiss car, the Alfa Romeo. And that will be a concern for them because they will be seeing that quite significantly in the data. But back to you guys in the box.
Thank you very much, Sam Collins. Excellent stuff as ever. Let's go downstairs. Go on, Jonah.
How do you work out the width of the average finger? Is that taking in all the 4 fingers across all humans and then averaging them out? The average finger.
I mean, I loved it. I loved it as an example. It immediately confused us. Whilst we work that out for you, Will Buxton's at Ferrari.
I'm waiting for Charles Leclerc to turn up because he is the fastest man out on track, the fastest man that we've seen in this test. As you can see, Ferrari waiting for him. But if we look back to the start of the session this morning, it wasn't all running smoothly for Ferrari or for Charles Leclerc. As we know, he had that DRS problem. The flap opened up. Now, what I can tell you about that is he's fitted a new rear wing. Let's go down and have a look at it. Because it's not a new rear wing. It's the old rear wing. What he was running this morning that he had the failure on was a brand new higher downforce rear wing, which had, as you see on this rear wing, which is the rear wing he's been running all the way through the test, it has 2 struts in the center there. The wing that he was running this morning had just 1 strut in the middle of where those 2 struts are now that secures.
Thank you very much, Will Buxton.
Some debate as to whether a thumb is a finger. Because I said 4 fingers.
I don't think a thumb is a finger.
A thumb is not.
No.
It's a digit, but it's not a finger. So there you go. Little clarification this morning before we head into pace stats. Remember that?
Yeah,
pace stats.
We trailed that.
We trailed it. It's time for pace stats.
Need a jingle
everybody
for this. Here we go.
Charles Leclerc tops the times on a 1:31.
Are you just going to read the timing page now?
yeah. No. So last year there was a new set of regulations, and it made the car slower. And everyone was saying the cars were as quick as they'd ever been in 2021. Fantastic championship battle between Lewis and Max. And last year the cars got slower, and the cars were cumbersome in the high speed. And generally there was a feeling of, why do you make the cars slower? Interestingly, looking at this year compared to last year, and I'm taking yesterday as a finished article of a day and comparing it with last season, and it was Zhou in the Alfa Romeo that topped the times. Ooh, a little bit twitchy for Leclerc there on his soft tyre run. But taking yesterday's time, so 1:31.6 for Zhou was 2 seconds quicker than Carlos Sainz did in the Ferrari to top day 2 last year. So there's 2 seconds of progression, like for like. Of course, a lot of that was coming throughout last year as well, and then the latest evolution this year. But interestingly, if you take it back to the last generation of car, and if you'd have just put Zhou's Alfa Romeo yesterday in amongst the 2021 cars on their day 2, he's coming 7th out of 17 in an Alfa Romeo.
Wow. They've clawed it back.
1.3 seconds away from the fastest on that day, which was set by Valtteri Bottas in the Mercedes. So it's really coming back, the pace of this generation of car. It's been incremental a lot through last year. Of course, we started with all that porpoising that Sam was mentioning, and it's been dialed out pretty much completely now. And now the performance is coming on. A new chassis build has hopefully given a load more headroom to find more performance, and we're getting quickly back to the really most fastest Formula One cars that we've had. There's your interesting pace stats.
It was worth it. I'm glad we trailed it, because I think that is worth underlining, that they are clawing back, despite the fact that these are the heaviest ever version, a couple of kilos less this year, but the heaviest ever version we've seen in the history of the sport, and yet clawing back to the well, maybe Pedro de la Rosa's lap record.
Who knows? I don't think it'll come this year.
This year.
We're not there, but these regulations are going to be stable for a while, and we will get back and maybe beyond, surely beyond what we had before. So the genius of F1 car design and an ever-evolving concept. The other thing that's interesting is reliability, hand in hand with that. Pace getting much better. Reliability, when we've been commentating, it's felt like it's been fairly plain sailing. We had an electrical issue for the Aston Martin day 1. There was a small oil leak on the Red Bull yesterday. There was a hydraulic issue for the Mercedes. But calculating all the laps this year to last year, remember last year as well, there was a Barcelona shakedown before.
Yeah.
So there was a time to dial out some issues, which they've not had apart from some testing, filming mileage before this week. There's been a total of 750 more laps across 2 days.
You are bringing the stats today. That is a huge step forward.
Each team has done, vis-a-vis, 75 more laps than they did at this time last year, on average. It's a huge amount more. Bearing in mind the driver gets a day and a half in the car, they're getting a load more information than they would have been last year. Of course, there was the shakedown as the caveat last year that wasn't timed.
Especially useful for the rookies.
Exactly.
When testing is so restricted and you've been in the sim for a really long time. But at points of testing, it's not felt like testing because it's all been running so efficiently.
And hence, Sargent could do 154 laps yesterday.
Yeah.
Brilliant for him. And there have been days in the past where a rookie gets in the car and you're out of the car in 20 laps, and the thing's packed in, the engine's gone, the gearbox is gone, major change, and that's your morning over. We've had really none of those issues.
And most of the teams have had really smooth shakedowns as well. So they got the car out of the box early doors. They performed as they expected. So that really gives you a good baseline headed in to these final few days before the season starts. And I think obviously like the regulations are relatively stable, right? Last year was a brand new generation of car. These are kind of evolutions of last year. But even so, I think it does show, and we were talking about the speed of the cars improving, it just shows how talented the people in Formula One are, that they are able to, as the rule makers of Formula One are trying to slow them down, they still find a way to speed back up again.
Always the case. It's interesting that there was a difference in mentality, wasn't there? Because for a long time, post 1994, safety was such at the forefront that it always seemed to be a way to make sure that the pace was kept under limits. And then basically started by Max Verstappen, there was a talk of, well, you can't just be thrown in a Formula One car and it be simple. So we need to make them wider and we need to make them bulkier. We had the wider tires come back. And then suddenly, for the first time, it was not about keeping a lid on the pace. There was a desire to see, because the safety standards had moved so far forward, there was a desire to see that we get to the forefront, the cutting edge, and the fastest version of the cars we've ever seen.
And it's done in a fantastic way, ground effect, and the cars are able to follow each other much more closely. Drugovich completes a lap and goes fifth. It's getting some performance running. There's definitely a shout that Aston Martin are going to chuck him in the car next week, I think. And just finally, quick accuracy point, whilst we're on stats and accuracy. We were talking about the VB beer. Will Buxton was at pains to point out there is a JP beer. It's a craft beer from Colombia.
Oh, sensational.
Excellent.
It's rated 3.6 stars out of 5.
Oh,
so
okay.
I would have hoped for more.
Yeah.
Middling.
But there we go. So I apologise for saying there wasn't. A quick search actually pointed out there was, to all the JP beer fans out there.
Taste test required in the combox, although after yesterday, maybe not a great idea. Let's send it downstairs once again to Sam Collins, who's made his way to turn 11.
Yeah, and it's a rather hairy place down here. I'm assured by our cameraman I'm entirely safe stood where I am. I don't particularly like it, and I'll show you why shortly when the next car comes through the corner. It's going quite slowly, so he's not going to scare me. But this is a very scary place to stand, and I don't really like it. But I'll just tell you about the weather conditions, man. It's quite hot, it's sunny, it's making me sweat. Bit of a wind in the air, but now you look at the cars coming towards us down this back stretch. Now, the Alfa Romeo there is just as the drivers come into the corner on a fast lap, as they run that entry curb, they're pointing directly at my knees. Leclerc will be the next car we see, but he's probably going to be going quite slow. It's an outlap, but when they're coming at full speed, you really see the effects of a Formula One car braking from really quite a high speed along the red and white striped curb there, and then getting it slowed down into this corner and disappearing off up the hill. And it's really quite lively. So there's Leclerc going through really quite slowly, and the Ferrari, he'll be back a lot quicker in a couple of minutes. But Nick De Vries, he'll be down there. He's doing likewise. He's not got up to full speed. So we've got a lot of people going on outlaps, which means I think we're about to see some pretty fast laps, which from where I'm standing is a little bit scary. So Nico Hülkenberg back there in the Haas. You can see they're very distinctive. It's really interesting. The very distinctive yellow nose of the Red Bull. You can really see that coming towards you. But then the way the cars just change direction on the brakes, turn in, even on outlaps, is so impressive. The grip generated by this generation of Formula One car is so phenomenal. I'd really like to see someone like Jolyon Palmer get behind the wheel, or just to give us a real impression of how physical this generation of car is to drive. Because I know in the past some of the cars weren't as physical as they used to be, but I think these cars look pretty aggressive, not just for going over the bumps because they're so stiff. Now we've got Alex Albon coming up. He looks going quite slow out of that corner. And then Valtteri Bottas in the Alfa Romeo also putting quite a slow lap in, but he's picking up the pace going past the other car. And the Alfa Romeo now has passed and got past us. Bottas going onto that curb there. Look, just turning it, jamming the steering wheel, and it goes through. There goes for Williams. Here comes Felipe Martin towards us, and that will be coming. Now watch the way he moves onto the curb on the right-hand side and then turns in there. Shuts the DRS. A little bit slower there for the Aston Martin, a little bit unstable, actually noticeably unstable as he was driving out of the corner. Not sure if that's car or driver. And so you'll see that. And it's going to be interesting to see what Mercedes can do. Russell and Leclerc are the next two cars we see, but they haven't really picked up the pace, but it may be that one of them will start speeding up. Russell trying to get some heat into the tyres of that Mercedes. Really strange looking car. Every time I see it, I'm like, it just looks wrong, doesn't it? But maybe it works. We'll find out. Getting quite busy down there on track. The Ferrari getting out of the way of the the Haas that's coming quite quickly, followed by the Red Bull taking a lot more curb there, Sergio Perez, than the Haas did. Perhaps the Haas was a little bit put off its stride by the very slow Ferrari. But that's one of the things you're going to have to see dealing with these conditions. That light breeze that you might be able to see blowing through my hair as well, it's not quite strong enough to have an influence on the car, but we're on a little bit of a depressed spot. I wonder if the wind's a little bit stronger up on the hill and the drivers will be feeling it. Look at the AlphaTauri there. Looking quite good, off the throttle a little bit longer, but running all of the lap. Valtteri Bottas will be next through in the Alfa Romeo. Now, we saw him going slowly last time, or a little bit quicker last time by, and he's going slower this time. But you see them coming out of that corner just at the far end of the straight, almost with no speed at all. Then by the time they've reached you here, the speed the cars are doing is incredible. You see them brake and then turn in. And little bit of a moment for the Alfa Romeo there through the mid-corner. Quite a few drivers struggling with this corner. I think Jolyon will have to tell us a little bit more about the challenges of driving this one. It's an uphill corner, but it is ever so slightly banked, or it's cambered at least. But I think as you get up the hill, it sort of flicks back at you. The Aston Martin going very slowly past us at the moment. Not much to talk about there, but we'll see a faster car in a minute. And I think it's Nico Hülkenberg and Sergio Perez coming through next. We'll see who appears at the end of the straight momentarily. I can hear a car coming. I can't see a car coming. It's Nico Hülkenberg down there. You can see the white nose of the Haas coming towards us. There's the yellow nose of the Red Bull. Now the Haas is coming at a decent speed by the look of it. He'll move right onto the curb using all of the available racetrack, waggle its nose slightly, drive through the corner. Good grip. Perez using more track again than the Haas. Is he more confident in the Red Bull, or is he just, that's the way he drives? Different drivers have different styles, of course. Again, that's a Jolyon question. Here comes the Ferrari. Let's see what this can do, because this has looked like a good car. Using just as much track as Perez. Very good all the way through the corner. A little bit of a twitch on the corner exit. I think he's gone off there, actually. I can't see what happened, but he was well out of the throttle. And the AlphaTauri there, bit of a hop from the front wheel into that corner, but yeah, it looked like the Ferrari had a little bit of a moment. It may have gone off on the exit. He just went behind a tree, so I couldn't see him. That's the nature of it. Valtteri Bottas will be next car coming up, and it's really interesting. It's really amazing. I know we've done Formula One for years and years, but the speed of the cars building up towards us, so they come down to this straight, and the differences between the drivers through this corner and the approach, I just find it really fascinating, because you can see the difference between driving styles and the difference between the abilities of each individual car. But Jolyon, I've given you plenty of things to chat about there, and I don't think you're going to have time to do it all. So over to you guys in the commentary box.
Let's see if we have time to do it all as we review the moment. About 19 questions for Jolyon that he's trying to remember.
That curb, and he just got onto it, and he had a spin there in free practice last year, and that's maybe why he suddenly just dropped on the anchors to try and get control of the car, and had a lock-up coming back in. Russell doing some...
looking at Russell treating it like a formation lap. I think he's going to go all the way down to the end. So he pulled into the pits.
Some burnouts?
Yeah.
Maybe some burnouts? We cut away. What were Sam's questions? Why is it tricky to drive that corner? Because it's such a long, arcing corner. You go through, it's fast corner, and you go through a lot of wind angles, and it does pick up there a bit. If you have the wind behind you, you're struggling to get the car stopped. You're pushing on the whole way into turn 11, and the traction on the exit is particularly tough as well. Where Leclerc had his big moment over the curb, you want to get on the throttle as soon as you can, but you've got the curb there on the outside. You've got a lot of steering lock on as well, because it's such a long corner. You can't straighten off the exit. Actually, it looked like Hülkenberg did on one of those laps that we were following. He did quite a strange line. But yeah, that's so the entry to it is important, but the exit sweeping now as we see Russell coming through is equally important. And the amount of curb usage that teams have on the entry there is very, very different. The Haas isn't using it nearly so much, as Sam was pointing out. The Ferrari, the Red Bull that was behind him all over it. The Haas, I just think it's a stiffer car, and they're not able to abuse the curb. It was the same with K-Mag and Nico there on the entry. So they're just missing a little bit of available track to use than the others are, because maybe they've got a little bit more compliance.
Review of the day so far. A sensor fell off the Red Bull in the opening moments, bringing out a red flag. After that, we saw a spin for Oscar Piastri heading down the hill to turn 10. No damage done, though. Used the gargantuan tarmac runoff there to recover, and he made it back to the pits. After that, we saw George Russell bolt on first the C4 and then the C5 to momentarily go top, and then Charles Leclerc on a C4 tyre has taken the fastest time with 2 hours and 15 minutes of the session to go on the final day of pre-season testing for Formula One in 2023. Hulkenberg continuing to run laps out there. A quick check-in with the lap count. Leclerc on 25, Russell on 25. It's 35 for Perez. Gasly on 23. Drugovich, we saw his racing history on the graphic, hoping for a Formula One debut. Still no word on whether that is going to be the case for him. 21 laps on the board for the Aston Martin driver in the test. Then the driver we're looking at has 30. It's 25 for Piastri, 25 for Albon, and the field of the morning completed by Bottas on 39, De Vries on 38.
And Russell is straight into a long run as well, which is what Bottas and De Vries have spent their entire morning doing, 39 and 38 laps on similar tyres, running reasonably similar pace on the whole. Bottas a little bit quicker. I haven't loved the look of the AlphaTauri so far this week. I'm going to lay it out there. It just doesn't look like it's turning very well. Sam again said that they were waiting for the throttle. That's what you have to do when you've got a very understeery car.
Still half a day to go, though, Jolien. Is that the kind of thing that they are going to start to worry about?
Well, if you can maybe find a bit of balance, then you can sort it out. But the problem is you start trying to dial out the understeer, you might create some rear instability, which can be even worse to drive around than a little bit of understeer.
Hulkenberg continuing on a long run. 2 hours and 13 minutes to go. The Haas driver out there, rated very highly by former teammate Jolien Palmer.
If you could be within sort of 0.3 of Hulkenberg, you're an exceptional racing driver. That's what I'd say in the same car.
We're not going to do better than that. Thank you very much to Jolien Palmer and Lawrence Pareto. We are going downstairs, and then you'll hear from David Croft and Anthony Davidson.
Thank you, mate. Yeah, we're down here outside McLaren. You can see Oscar Piastri on the world feed, but with us, I'm concentrating on the wheel brows, because once again, a McLaren is not going anywhere because of work being done on those wheel brows. It's exactly where we were halfway through day one. We're exactly there halfway through the final morning, and it's exactly the same problem. You see they're applying some resin. They've had the heat guns on it already. They've been sanding it down. They're now applying some more resin. The heat gun, I would imagine, will come back out again. And this is all about trying to strengthen these wheel brows, which have been an inherent issue for this car ever since it first got out there on track. It's all about the strength of them. Whether it's a design fault, whether it's a manufacturing fault, we are not sure. But James Key, the designer of this car, has just been into the garage and walked off and is looking, actually, no, he's actually kneeling down by the back of the car. He's looked nothing but concerned all the way through this test, particularly today. Of course, James, so highly regarded when he was over as part of the Red Bull family and with the team we now know as AlphaTauri, was convinced to come over to McLaren to spearhead their assault on the Formula One World Championship. It hasn't quite worked out for him or the team as yet. The reason that this car doesn't have the pace that many McLaren fans would be expecting isn't just that it's missed its targets. It's the fact those targets were actually changed in the lead up to the launch. Because of that, the launch car is kind of a snapshot, a freeze frame of a moment in time before the team decided to take a different developmental curve because of discoveries they made in terms of where they wanted to take this car, the path of progression that they were going to take with it. They decided wasn't the ultimate one, wasn't the optimum one. And so they've changed direction. So this car is sort of frozen until that new development, that new direction can be put into play with developments which will come online 4 or 5 races into the season. But for the here and the now, these integral parts of the car and the aerodynamics of the car, those wheel brows, are a real point of concern for the team because they just can't keep them pointing upright. They're trying to strengthen them. But again, we're at this position where they just can't seem to get the job done. Oscar Piastri, who you can see there, has been in the car, just been sorting out his seating position in the car. They've been applying a little bit more foam behind his back, not quite comfortable. It's just the normal things you get in testing, particularly for a rookie who will have had his seat made, and perhaps there's a little part of it where he just needs to be pushed up a little bit further towards the front of the cockpit, needs to raise his head perhaps a little bit higher just to get a better view down towards those front tires, and just get an optimum line of sight. But Piastri would rather be out on track right now, pumping in the laps, every lap, of course, every second out on track, so crucial to every driver, but particularly for the Formula One rookies here in 2023. But we can pan back to the front of the car. He's going absolutely nowhere. This car has not hit its targets. This car has not hit the pace that the team wanted to see from it. And right now, it has serious issues with the structural integrity of those wheel brows, which is stopping it from even going out on track. This is a problem, as we've said, that they've been experiencing all the way from day one. We are in the final day, and those issues have not been rectified. Big questions right now. David Croft and Anthony Davidson down here at McLaren, and I think the biggest question in the paddock, perhaps you can answer it, isn't necessarily of where McLaren will find itself come the race, but how far down the order they will find themselves come the opening race weekend of the season.
Well, thank you very much, William Buxton. In the commentary box now, myself, David Croft, and Anthony Davidson to take you through until the lunch break. And we're on board with Valtteri Bottas in the Alfa Romeo as he completes what could be his best time of the session. Stays ninth, a 1:38.433, and it was his best time of the session. Hello, I wasn't lying. Here we are in the commentary box. Glad you've managed to get back to the track. Of course. Well, it was never in doubt. We arrived this morning. You'd have seen Anthony at the top of the program, and then you had to go back to the hotel to get your running gear. Because tonight, after we've seen all the pace on the track and we know the proper pecking order, we're going to go and run the track, jog the track, and do our own little pecking order on that one. Which at the moment I think is Emma, our production manager, because she's training for a marathon. You, because you're still actually quite fast, and then potentially me third and last. It's a bit like Johnny Herbert in Monaco in '96. Yeah, third and last.
Yeah, I mean, it's going to. It's actually, when you run the circuit, you realise how undulating it is.
It is.
We're out here in the middle of the desert, and you'd think it'd just be completely flat, but and the cameras do that as well. It always does, but when you actually walk it or run the track, you really do feel those elevation changes, like this dip down towards turn 10. It's getting to 13. Combine that with a bit of the wind swirling around that area of the track, and the combination between 12 into 13 actually becomes a really difficult part of the track to manage.
I've just remembered, back in the dim and distant past, you remember the first year we ran Spa together?
I do. And I often tell that story.
And we were at Stavelot, and we started the climb up to the bus stop chicane through Blanchimont. But just before we got there, and Anton said to me, at least all the uphill parts have gone now. I said, what do you mean the uphill parts are gone? We've got the run to the bus stop.
I said, it's all flat from here, isn't it?
I said, we've got the run to the bus stop. Oh, no, that's just flat, isn't it? I went, no. Which bit of that uphill climb is flat? And because you'd only ever done it in a racing car, you didn't appreciate just how steep the climb was.
No way.
Which I found incredible.
It's all right when it feels flat when you got 800 to 1,000 horsepower sitting under you. It's much easier.
Certainly was. Anyway, we're delighted to be here. Happy weekend, everybody. Whatever you're doing on this Saturday, whether you're just waking up or you've had a full day and you're settling in for some testing coverage in the evening, I'm really glad that you decided to join us on what is a pivotal day today, and a day where George Russell, as you can see, has set his best time on the C5 tyre, the softest of all the tyre compounds. And I've just been talking to Super Scoop Craig Slater,
on Sky Sports News, and he said, "Crofty, is this a sign that Mercedes are in trouble, that they've gone out there on the C5 tyre to grab a headline time?" I said, "No, it's a sign it's testing, Craig, and they're trying to test the different tyres and they're trying to get through a run program. But it is key, and it is interesting, because in the past, in recent years, we've not seen Mercedes needing to concentrate on the soft tyres because they've had the pace of the field. And that changed last year, might have changed a bit the year before, and it's definitely been the case this year, where they need to get a handle on those C5 tyres."
I think it's the same for every team out there, Crofty, actually. The tyres have changed quite a bit going into this season. And I think the teams, despite not running them next weekend, the races this year come at you so thick and fast, apart from the lull in April, of course, that they're trying to not just get an understanding of the tyre for, well, this week here, but for the future, the race is coming up at you later on. And it's the ideal time with so few cars on track, like we talked about yesterday, effectively half the field out there. It's a beautiful time to get out there and learn each compound, what they do, what the deficit is, what the wear rates are like, what it does to your balance of the car. All that data is just being gathered. So it's not about going out there and grabbing a headline time. It's the only thing we have to look at the lap times, and the standout lap time is the thing we all end up talking about. But it's not like that for the teams. They've got a program they want to run through. It's all about a data collection exercise. And we'll see every team up and down the grid probably running the C4 and the C5 at some point in a bid to see what happens for later on, if they need to tweak car balance later on in the season when they start running those tyres.
Yeah, that lull in April is going to be quite key for all teams, but particularly for, and as George Russell pointed out in his interview with Ted Kravitz last night, the likes of Mercedes, McLaren, I think as well, who've got big upgrade packages coming, because it just gives you a chance to assess, reassess and reset after the first 3 races, and spend time back at the factory getting the package right for then the flood of races to come after that. And we've got 5 races in 6 weeks, haven't we?
Yeah, also another thing to remember, is that the blanket temperatures have changed. I was reminded earlier on today that the blanket temperatures have gone down to only 70 degrees now.
So what was it when you were racing?
Well, I think it was free. You could do whatever you wanted with the blanket temps. Wow. And you could pump them up to 110 degrees if you wanted, to match what the tyre would actually see for the surface of the tyre out on track. So 70 degrees starts to become quite cool, and you think that's where the tyre usually runs, like 90 to 110 degrees, within that range. So knocking them back to 70, suddenly you've got to reassess, reevaluate, and gather all that data again. Right, what happens to the C5, C4? How can we, how does it respond to running the blanket temps that low?
Are we going to be in a situation where drivers are going to need more warm-up on the tyres then?
I should think so, yeah. So, and not here, of course, such a hard track on the tyre, and that's why we don't run the C5 and C4 tyre at Bahrain. But at the circuits where you do have to run it because the circuit gives you poor warm-up and it's maybe cooler as well, they're going to start running into problems.
So there's a change in the preparation from the driver's side, which is a good thing. I more in the hands of the drivers, I think, is always a good thing for me. But I don't want to see too much veering and weaving from side to side on a formation lap to get as much energy to energize those tyres. But we'll see come the first. Are we going to get cooler races this year? Imola could be quite cool again, couldn't it?
Yeah, it often is.
Springtime in Imola, it might be. It's a little bit.
I think Baku is the one they all fear, because you got those long straights. The surface of the tyre cools down, even though the bulk goes up. It's the surface of the tyre that goes down. Oh, that's Alex Albon getting all out of shape on the exit of turn 4 there. Aggressive downshifts, really revving the engine through turn 6 as well, and that does not look like he's got the balance he wants in that Williams.
Now that looks a handful, doesn't it?
Very much so. But we saw a lot of this yesterday, Crofty, in these temperatures, don't forget.
We did. This time next week, we'll be thinking about FP3 and we'll be thinking about qualifying. So Aston Martin have decided, Felipe Drugovich, put the soft tyre on. Let's get some representative low fuel pace from yourself here. We've seen Fernando Alonso on the medium, on the C3 tyre, go out on a slightly lower fuel. But now let's see Felipe Drugovich, who, this time next week could well find himself in the situation where he's thinking about qualifying, because we still don't know if Lance Stroll is going to be racing for the team or not.
So he's on the C5 tyre now. He's set his personal best on the C4. That was the second softest tyre in Pirelli's range this year, as Fernando Alonso watches on after his hard day's work yesterday and the day before's afternoon session. So now it's time for Drugovich, who always has a good time on the board, actually. Up there for what it's worth, P4. I don't like giving classifications in a test session, but that's what I say.
You did
32, yeah, 32
when you were tested.
Yeah, meant a lot back then. 32.4. So you would expect naturally to go a bit faster on the softer tyre, even though the conditions got a bit hotter. Just over 2.5 tenths down in the first split. Looks pretty neat and tidy. Maybe not leaning on the car as much as you would expect through the exit of turn 7, and being nice and gentle on a throttle pickup as well out of turn 8. You can tell already that this guy is used to driving on Pirelli rubber from the F2 category, of course, where they're even more fragile with tyre wear, particularly at this track. You can tell those little tricks you need in your armoury as a racing driver, he's already got them. So that's why he's in good stead, I think, for if he has to replace Lance. I think he's going to do a decent job. Let's see what he's up at the second sector. Personal best again, now 8.5 tenths down. And, I mean, maybe being a bit harsh, I would expect the Aston to be a little bit quicker than that. I would expect Fernando to be within those 8 tenths by the second split. But it's very early days. This is an uphill learning curve in a brand new car for Drugovich, and a second away, didn't achieve the fastest last sector for him, and maybe that makes sense. Being on the softest tyre, they start to give up a bit in that final sector, but he improves his time nevertheless, goes up to in inverted commas P3.
The interesting thing there for me is that George Russell, also on the C5 tyre, was about 6 tenths of a second faster. So here's a little conundrum for you, and I don't know if you can work this out or not. But we think that the Aston Martin has made gains. Certainly looks like they've made gains. Yesterday, were they on a par with Mercedes? And Mercedes were struggling. Aston Martin might have looked a little bit ahead. Mercedes said there was a lot of learning to do overnight, and we can find answers to the problems, and we can fix things and put it right. We've come back to the track today, and within the space of about 3/4 of an hour, George Russell has gone 6 tenths of a second faster than Felipe Drugovich. Well, so which bit of these factors is driver, and which bit of these factors is car?
I was just thinking, look, I really respect Drugovich. He's a champion, but this is all new to him. I know he said he's got all those tricks in his armory that you need, but he's still mastering his craft in Formula One, and very, very early days for him. And you don't want to do anything wrong in those early days. You feel the pressure. And like I said, he looked a little bit driving within himself through turns 6 and 7 at least. And Fernando, typically with all that confidence and experience, he's got in a brand new car, and it looks like he's been in it forever, the way he's driving. And so that's what you expect from Fernando. And so without being harsh on Drugovich, I would conservatively expect Fernando to go 4 tenths quicker.
Right. 4 tenths quicker.
Yeah, that's a conservative. I would say maybe I'm not doing Drugovich justice here, but just from what I've seen so far and my natural expectations from what Fernando can bring and what we've seen so far this week, let's just say 4 tenths. That brings them into the firing line of around Mercedes pace.
Absolutely.
You're suddenly only 2 tenths away.
So Russell, 6 tenths faster though. Drugovich has just pitted, so we're assuming that was a low fuel run, but they might have pitted to hide whatever they wanted to hide in terms of fuel load.
At least it's like for like Crofty with the tyre.
Yeah,
we know
exactly.
they both just ran on a brand new C5 tyre. Similar conditions within what? 10, 15 minutes of each other?
Yeah. Well, it might be a little bit more.
A little
than
bit
that. What I want to develop this a little bit, this theme. And I did ask Christian Horner this morning, because I was having a little chat to him, when I said, look, just how good is your car? We think it's the class of the field, but is it really good and a class in the hands of one driver, and is it not quite as fast in the hands of the other driver? You know, let's put the max factor, if I could use that headline, into the equation here, because last year Max was getting more out of that car than Sergio, and in the times so far that we've seen, that might have carried on a little bit, but we've not seen Sergio do a full day. Have Aston Martin got a similar issue with Fernando Alonso as a two-time world champion against his teammate Lance Stroll, who, with all due respect to Lance, isn't a two-time Formula One world champion? You know, you'd say Charles Leclerc, Carlos Sainz at Ferrari, they're quite a balanced in terms of ability driver lineup. Both are capable of winning races because both have won a race. Same at Red Bull, but Max seems to be in that stratosphere of drivers that's above the good and not quite the greats as yet. He might be a great one day. You know, same with Lewis and George. You know, there's a bit more balance at Mercedes in the drivers. But it's difficult to work out, isn't it, just how good the car is when there might be a bit of an imbalance in the times being set by the drivers. You and Taco in F3,
I think
at that time, you were brilliantly matched, you know, because you were both absolutely on the top of your game.
I think it's maybe a little bit harsh saying that Max isn't a great. At least in terms of pure speed, he's phenomenal.
I think
he's a beast. He's an absolute beast. I mean, who can step in that car and beat him?
Okay.
I haven't seen anyone do it yet.
Not consistently, no.
No. And the worrying thing is, I see him. He's still getting better. It's still early days in his career, and I would already class him as a great.
Interesting.
Yeah, just from what I've seen, other racing drivers totally agree with me as well on this one. What we see, it's one of those, you only see it every once in a while. A driver like that, it's a Senna, it's a Schumacher, it's a Hamilton, and you can immediately throw him into that same mold.
See, and I'm not saying you're wrong by any stretch of the imagination.
Factually, I'm wrong because the stats don't back it up. That's where you're coming from.
Yeah, I'm the stats.
Yeah, but in terms
to me,
of
he's got the potential to be a great, and it wouldn't surprise me at all if by the time he retires, which remember he said could be at 31, by the time he retires, he is regarded and known as one of the greats of the sport.
You know, my father that watched the F1 in the 60s would stand there and say that Sterling Moss was one of the greats.
Yeah, well,
never won a championship.
Was Sterling Moss the greatest driver never to win a world championship?
I don't know, because I didn't see him drive.
Ask your dad.
Yeah, maybe he was, but a lot of it's down to perception.
Yeah,
and all I know is I've got an eye for watching. You know, I've done this my whole life, and I'd like to think I know what I'm looking at. And I see that there is a difference there with the way that Max performs in the car compared to Perez. And so going back to your question to Horner, what did he say?
Oh, yeah, because there was a question that went with that as well.
We completely went off piece there.
No, but I like it when we do that. It's fun. And honestly, at Crofty F1, send me your tweets. I'd love to hear people's viewpoints on this one. And I'll read some tweets out in a moment as they make from tweets to tweaks. They're still looking in and around the brake area, the wheel brow area. Have they just got a bit loose again at McLaren?
Or if they put a sensor on it. I can't quite see with it. Yeah, is there a sensor running through? Oh, and you know what they've done? They've also put in some, the heat. Is it the heat sensors?
Yeah. The team are currently conducting some temporary strengthening work on the, McLaren call them front winglets, we call them wheel brows, to ensure we can complete today's running. It's a very minor issue that will be permanently fixed for the Grand Prix next weekend. So which I read into that, to save on weight, we've...
Great shot there, by the way, isn't it?
Absolutely. We've gone down on the strengthening. And we're going to have to go back and strengthen these because that's not the first time, it's the second time it's happened during the course of this test. What Christian said was, it's very difficult to tell. Sergio hasn't had a full day's running yet. He's only had half a day. We'll see more by the end of the day. But there is no doubting Max is absolutely on top of his game at the moment. I'm kind of paraphrasing and trying to remember the exact words. But Max, clearly is showing his ability and getting better all the time. Was Christian's view on that one, but he was very much defending Sergio in that he hasn't had all the time in the car as yet. And look, I'm not trying to put Sergio down in any way, shape or form. It's just, let's look at the stats. He's not winning as many races in that Red Bull as his teammates at the moment, and often there is a 4-5 tenths kind of difference during the course of qualifying.
I think if you asked most drivers on the grid that if you could get in that sister car at Red Bull and be consistently around 3 to 4 tenths off only from Max, especially in race pace, would you accept that? I reckon they'll go, yeah, that would be a job well done, I reckon.
Yeah, I agree. Mark Hughes, who's a magnificent journalist and who will stand in the commentary box alongside Martin and myself at various times during the course of the season, helping us out during the course of races, says, Crofty, Stirling Moss, not only the greatest never to win a title, but one of the greatest drivers of all time. Every one of his peers said we can't do what he does. Stats, he says, are relatively meaningless without context, which I totally agree, and I try and use stats to give context, Mark, as you well know.
I never saw the race, but all I'm trying to say is that you can't just... It's not the deciding factor how good a racing driver is. It's really not, because the car is so much to do with your performance. It's not like other sports in that respect. It's not like being a runner or a javelin thrower. It's more like horse racing. Yeah. There is another beast under you that really dictates your performance, and you can only compare against your teammate.
A good jockey will always make a bad horse better.
Yeah, but you're not going to win the Derby, are you? On a bad horse, terrible horse.
Not going to win the Derby on a pit pony, you're absolutely right. No. Do you remember in Monaco, many, many years back in the day, when you and I were stood in a commentary box in a practice session, we had Stirling Moss live on the line, and he joined us for a bit of a chat, and we were reminiscing about Monaco and having the greatest time, as we always did, chatting to Stirling, and we got onto the subject of great drivers, and I said, come on, Stirling, in your opinion, who was the greatest driver of all time? To which he replied, Fangio, old boy. And you did exactly then what you just did now and started grinning, and so did I. And it was just the joy in his voice. But it's your rival. When he talked about Fangio, he absolutely adored Fangio and what he could do behind the wheel.
It's your rival at the time, though, isn't it?
Yeah.
Like I say, it's a generational thing. And for him, his nemesis was Fangio.
I know.
And vice versa,
but
probably.
He absolutely, appreciated and adored Fangio as a driver and the talent of the man. Fangio, old boy. I will never forget his voice ringing in my ears there.
And like I say, it comes down to perception. And there's no right answer.
It was a true delight to spend time talking to Stirling. He was a great man.
How many laps is that saying? 15 laps. So this is a proper long run, isn't it? We haven't seen a long run of that length yet. We saw at the end of the session last night around 6 or 7 laps worth.
Yep.
But the degradation wasn't that bad, actually, particularly on the Red Bull and the Ferrari. Both on different tyres they were running then, so that was Leclerc and Verstappen at the wheel of their respective cars. And what do we got here from, speaking of Charles Leclerc, into turn 10, just locks up. So easily done. It's such a delicate balancing act, that one. It's an annoying call.
Russell are evenly matched. His unbelievable disrespect to Hamilton. Russell not fit to lace his boots. Come on, Mikey. I think that's a bit disrespectful to George Russell, to be honest, as well. I said more evenly matched. as well. There's no doubting Lewis Hamilton has won 7 more titles than George Russell. George is just starting out on his journey now and is a fine driver. As Ant said, stats are meaningless without a bit of context as well. What I was trying to say is I think as it stands at the moment, those two drivers are more evenly matched in their performances out on the track.
There's a saying in motor racing, you're only as good as your last race.
Yeah. Kiki says the way the other F1 drivers talk about Max as well, Max is one of the greatest. However, like I say, I love opinion. Maddie says, Anthony Davidson, what's he on? Max Verstappen is very good, but far from great or the greatest. He's got a long way to go. Red Bull had a very quick car last year with no real opposition and really designed it around Max's driving style. Has Maddie got a point in that bit there, that it is designed around Max's style, therefore you can expect him to be better?
I just look at it where he's come from, the teammates he's had. Started in Toro Rosso, you stick him into the Red Bull for the first race he's ever done anything, and yes, I know the two Mercedes wiped each other out, but he wins, and he beat his teammate on that day. And I think, look, the cream always rises, doesn't it?
Yeah.
And a team starts to lean more towards their car development and who they trust in their feedback by whoever's delivering constantly faster lap times.
Yeah.
And that seems to have always been the case with Max, particularly at Red Bull. So no, I mean, like I say, look, everyone's entitled to their own opinion. He's not the greatest in terms of statistics, of course, but he is on his way, and it's you don't like he is a rarity. You don't see that caliber of driver come along very often. It was great when Lewis Hamilton burst onto the scene, and what a phenomenal driver, and he still is. I don't know where he finds his motivation as a 7-time world champion. You keep coming back for more and more, and he's as hungry, and Alonso as well, as hungry as the first day they ever stepped foot in a Formula 1 car.
It's that work ethic, I think, that puts you up there as one of the greats, actually, and to do it, you know, Lewis and Fernando over so many seasons. Max is incredible, says Adi, but the first title was controversial. I agree with Anthony. There is so much more to come. Secondly, come on McLaren, # get it sorted. Alex Rizzoli says, Jim Clark has got to be the greatest. F1, F2, BTCC, and heaven knows what else in 1 year. Incredible.
I think I would agree with that comment. I've always said it. I never saw him race, but I've seen enough clips and realised, because I've driven a few different categories of cars in my career, and it does definitely make you a more rounded driver, is what I was saying about Nick de Vries. Actually, he's on camera right now. He's driven a lot of different series in motorsport, and I really think it gives you that makes you a more complete driver, and Fernando's done the same. And that's what Jim Clark was able to do.
Exactly.
And win in everything he ever did.
Yeah. Josh Stanley says, I think all the greats have gone elsewhere, more than one competitive team, and you've seen them excel. Currently, no disrespect to Toro Rosso, I'd need to see Max excel in a less optimal car to cement his great status.
Another good point.
Yeah, I always say about Lewis Hamilton and why I put him. To me, I do think Lewis is the greatest of all time. He's certainly the driver that I've seen win more races during my years as a commentator than any other, but he hasn't always had the best car.
I think that's what
people think he has, but he hasn't. Trust me.
No, he hasn't. And I think that's what made the 2021 season so amazing. The best season I've ever seen. I'm old enough to have seen Prost and Senna battle it out. And I would say that 2021 season was better than anything I saw in those days. It really was. And the reason for it is because the cars were so evenly matched and the drivers were so evenly matched as well. That's what we want to see. And this year, please, to the racing gods, I want to see 3 manufacturers up there. Yes. But it's all I ask. Well, I'm not greedy. Just 3 manufacturers for the first time in a long time. Actually, when was the last time? Can anyone answer that question?
We had 3.
3 manufacturers.
Magic number.
Who could win the championship. Was it that year when Vettel won his first? Back in 2010?
Well, that's when we had 4 drivers, didn't we, going into the final race with a chance of winning the title. So we had
It was probably then, wasn't
Vettel
it?
and Webber, Alonso and Hamilton. And Hamilton was a bit of a long shot, but yeah, that probably was that probably was the last time. The fact that it went down to the last lap of the last race in 2021 rather helps it's been the greatest season ever.
You're starting to tread on dodgy ground here, Crofty.
I'm not going with emotion at this stage. Apologies if I've upset anybody and anything I've just said.
What
in the
a
last
race
sentence.
to not be on the Skypad.
Yeah, there is that.
That's all I'm saying.
Mark Webber.
Yeah.
G'day. We said 2 Red Bulls were in contention there. Mark Webber now part of the managerial team that has got Oscar Piastri on the road to F1.
Do you reckon he's saying to him there, when it comes down to that last lap, those last couple of laps in the last race of the year in Abu Dhabi, and you're in there fighting for the championship, mate, don't listen to the team strategy.
Absolutely. I tell you
Go
what,
with your gut instinct, mate.
It's quite a road that Oscar's been on. Renault Euro Cup, and then F3 and F2, and of course now F1 as well. Hello. Pat Simmons has just walked in. We've got a chair for him there. And if you could give Pat one of the headphones. Rich Grinham says, in the modern era, there have been some great drivers who haven't won a title. Rubens and Massa are the 2 who really come into mind. What else have we got? I agree with Crofty. Max is great. That's what, but he's not yet a great. But it's something he has to earn during his career. James says, how can you say Hamilton's a great when it's all car? He's been equalled or beaten by 3 teammates. Max hasn't been beaten by a teammate, won 2 world titles. Senna only won 3 and was beaten by a teammate too. Michael never was apart from having a broken, and I think there's probably a bit more to that message, but that's where it stopped, James, I'm afraid. As I said, Hamilton hasn't always had the best car. Pat Simmons is with us. He's been in Formula One for a few more years than myself or Anthony, and we're just on the subject, well, 2 subjects here. First of all, who is the greatest driver never to have won a world title? Good morning, by the way. Good afternoon.
Hi, Crofty. I think that's difficult to answer. You know, I've worked with some great drivers. I worked with Senna, I worked with Schumacher, I worked with Alonso, all these other guys. Now, the interesting thing, if you take those 3...
They've all won a world title, by the way. They don't count for this bit.
Oh, you're saying who didn't win
win a world title,
Okay,
yeah.
That's his first question.
Martin Brundle.
No, honestly, that's a really good shout. Martin went to sports cars and proved just how good he
won
was.
the World Championship there.
I always say about MB, he was always in the wrong car at the wrong time.
Yeah, with the wrong teammate
as well.
With the wrong teammate, absolutely. So who was the greatest driver of all time?
Okay, the greatest. Well, it probably predates my time, because I think, you know, in those early days of Formula One, early days of Grand Prix racing, I should say. I mean, those guys, they were just heroes, weren't they? Maybe a little bit mad as well, but
I think it helps, to be fair. We love having opinions. Would you put Max Verstappen as an all-time great in the sport?
I think it's early to say that. He's driving absolutely superbly last year, but, you know, the challenge fell away, didn't it?
Yeah.
The Ferrari was there at the beginning of the year. By the end of the year, it was not so much falling away, because actually their competitiveness in the last few races was actually very good.
Yes.
But along the way, the mistakes, the tactical calls, all these sort of things really left Max in a great position. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm not detracting anything from his driving, his skill, his age, you know, absolutely amazing. But I think we need a few more years. We need to see Max in the car, maybe not quite so good.
Told you.
I think he's great.
I'm not saying he's not great.
I said statistically, he's not one of the greats. But he is, in terms of his skill, he's one of the greats. And then that got us on to talking about the likes of Sterling Moss, and, you know, his results didn't back up the theory that he's one of the greats, but we all process it as he was one of the greats because of his speed and his...
But Anthony, what's been harder for you? Winning in a great car or driving a car that you might describe in terms that we shouldn't use on air? Because that's what I think is a great driver, someone who can take something by the scruff of the neck and wring a performance out of it that really isn't there.
Well, when I won the World Championship in sports cars, I had the best car. And it makes you feel like a hero. And it makes it feel quite easy.
Yeah.
So winning the World Championship in sports cars was relatively easy.
On Nick for reference, the track is 5 degrees higher than yesterday racing.
Yeah, so that's going to take its toll.
Felt
Tyre.
warmer today as well, to be honest. Track temperature 41.3 degrees at the moment.
But yeah, to go back to your question, Pat, definitely my best results was when I finished 15th or 16th in a Formula 1 race that nobody ever saw. You didn't even feature, but I know I drove really well, and you put together the perfect weekend in a car that was never going to challenge the top 10. And they're some of my finest results, both in qualifying and
you know, the interesting thing is I can relate to that as an engineer.
Yeah.
Won 7 world championships. They weren't the difficult ones. You know, the people say, oh, you know, that was a fantastic strategy you just executed. No, it wasn't. I had the fastest car. It's easy then.
Yeah.
It's when you've really overperformed, you know, when you've even surprised yourself. Those are the days when you feel really proud, I think.
Definitely, yeah. All right, here's another question then. Who impressed you technically as a driver? Oh, as we see here running.
Car that Nico Hulkenberg
saw it just at the last minute, didn't he?
Yeah. Or at least he's got rid of it, but hopefully no damage to the Haas.
The track sweeper.
Technically, who impressed you the most?
Well, you see, I don't look for someone who impresses me technically. I look for someone who has the same sort of mindset that I have as an engineer, someone who's logical, someone who's clear in their explanations. So I don't want someone with a degree in physics. I don't want them to be explaining aerodynamics to me. I don't need that. What I need is I've got lots of data. I know an awful lot about the car. I know what it's doing. The thing I miss is the nut behind the steering wheel. You know, what does the driver want? What is it that doesn't allow him to go quite as fast as his teammate or his competitor or what have you? It's that description of that bit that I can't measure. So I don't want someone who's technically competent. I want someone who's just clear and logical. I want someone who's intelligent, because they need to have that spare capacity. If they're using it all up driving and they don't have that spare capacity to be able to describe what's going on, to be able to understand the little nuances from one lap to another, the wind's changed a little bit, the tyres have got a little bit hotter and all these sort of things. So, yeah, no physics for me, but good, clear explanation.
How do you think driver feedback has changed, Pat, over the years? So back in the days before the laptop was created and used so heavily in data analysis, you must have lent more towards drivers' feedback?
Yeah.
In a broader,
in a very holistic way.
So how has it changed, and what did you expect from the feedback back, you know, in the earlier days of Formula One, and what would you expect now from the driver? What are you looking for?
I'll give you a classic example. With I got involved in Formula One in early 80s, 81, and at that time we didn't have any data acquisition. In fact, one of my first jobs in Formula One was to build a data acquisition system out of these newfangled computer chips.
Because you were the one that had the laptop.
That's right. We didn't have a laptop.
It was Jock Clear said to me, actually, the biggest evolution, the biggest step in engineering he saw in his time in Formula One was the laptop.
Yeah, it's electronics generally, computer programming, etc. So if I go back to my days, you know, working at Tolman with Derek Warwick, with Brian Henton, even with Ayrton, you know, into the slightly getting towards the mid-80s, we had no instrumentation. So even things like, have we got the right top gear in? You know, what revs are you pulling on the straight? What's the water temperature? Have we got the blanking right? I needed them to read these old analog gauges on their dashboard. And the story I want to tell you is that with Derek one day, he was complaining about engine pickup. Hot turbo, yeah, I'm not surprised he was complaining about engine pickup. It didn't pick up. It sort of, you could flick the pages in your calendar by the time it got up to full revs.
I think we've all driven road cars like that.
Yeah, exactly.
Actually, our hire car here is...
we still do.
It's like you're describing the exact vehicle.
See, that's how we've moved on. Anyway, I wanted to know what the minimum revs were in the corner. I didn't want to know what the revs on the straight were in this particular instance. I said, I want to know what your minimum revs are. Then I start to think about, you know, what we're going to do with the engine. And Derek said, you can't do that. You cannot read the minimum revs in the corner. So I said, oh, okay. So I went home after that race, got my Golf GTI, and I spent the whole week practicing going into corners as fast as I could.
No.
And just when I was at the point where I thought I'm safe and I can open the throttle, I glanced at the rev counter and see what the revs were. I went back to Derek following me. I said, Derek, I think you can do it, because the action of opening the throttle means that you're feeling confident. So glance. And he came back and he said, you know what, you're right. So I am a data acquisition system.
Excellent. Well, Mr. Data Acquisition System, let's move from the past to the future. Because now you've finished helping shape the regulations and the way the cars look for the meantime. You've moved on to other special projects. And to me, this is such an important project that you're working on now that will define the future of Formula One. And that's sustainable fuels. We see electric series, we see hybrids, but Formula One, running its own hybrid now, of course, still, I think, wants to be a combustion engine series. So what are we going to put in the cars from 2026 onwards, where the engines change, that allows it to still have a combustion engine, but not make bad emissions for the planet, shall we say?
A couple of things here, Crofty. Sustainable fuels, fabulous project, absolutely, and we'll talk about that. But it is part of a sustainability program. It's a part of Formula One becoming sustainable. It's part of our drive to net zero by 2030, and that's not just the cars, that's the events, it's our operations, it's everything we do. And it's an incredibly difficult target. There's an awful lot of work to do to get there, but we're really, really trying hard. One of the aspects of it is sustainable fuel. And this came about, I guess I started on this around probably in 2017, 2018, 2018. Started thinking, what do we need for the future? I was certainly, I've got children, I've got grandchildren. I know what they're interested in. I know that sustainability is a topic. Global warming is not a discussion. No. It's a fact. Discussions finished many, many years ago. So I thought, what we have to do is we have to get on top of this. I actually said to Ross Brawn, who was my boss at the time, I said, Ross, I think unless we're proactive, we're going to lose this battle. The day someone comes to us and accuses us of not being sustainable, we don't have a leg to stand on. It'll be too late at that time. And I get terribly offended when I read in the sort of popular press the words gas guzzling next to Formula One.
Yeah.
Time and time again, we're not gas guzzlers. We have the most efficient engine on the planet already, but it burns fossil fuels. So around 2018, I said, right, what can we do? And I started sort of looking into synthetic fuels, biofuels, etc. I knew a little bit about biofuels, not a great deal more than that. I had to teach myself a lot. And I was saying during our conference the other day that one of the great things is I live in Oxford, and it has the best second-hand bookshops in the world, because all the students put all their books in there at the end of the year. So down to the Oxfam shop, buy all the chemistry books and start learning about hydrocarbon fuels. So many late nights pouring through my books. Yeah. Well, you do, much better than a crime novel or a murder mystery. Wow, the mysteries of carbon and hydrogen.
Agatha Christie couldn't have written it any better. Yes.
Well, I think she was involved, actually. So yeah, started getting this idea together, started talking to people, started building up knowledge about it. Went to talk to some of the what were then called oil companies, and not all of them terribly receptive, some of them quite good. But we then signed a deal with Aramco to become a global partner of Formula One. And Aramco were absolutely fantastic. I said people called themselves oil companies. Aramco were the first people who said, no, we're an energy company. Right. And that was a bit of a breakthrough for me, here was someone who said, yeah, we drill for oil, for fossil fuels, we know all about that. But equally, we know it has to stop. So now we're working towards sustainable fuels. I also was really pretty aware already that a lot of the early biofuels were not sustainable. They were they really weren't a good thing. They were competing for land use, with crops, all these sort of bad aspects to it. So I said, right, when we do this, we're going to do it properly, because one of the reasons it's actually quite a difficult subject to research is there is so much hype out there.
Yeah.
And that's a polite word, because some of it really is downright lies. There are people saying they're doing things that, when you dig into it, they're not really there. And you have to understand the full life cycle analysis of the carbon, how much energy has been used in making your product, how much carbon's been released in making the product, etc. And so what I decided was that we weren't going to rush into this. There are people out there using sustainable fuels, small quantities. For example, we've introduced it into Formula 2 and Formula 3 this year, 55% blend. So why is it 55% blend? And the reason is you cannot get the sustainable molecules that you need to make the amount of fuel that we need.
And sorry, Pat, that's synthetic fuel, or that's biofuel?
That's a synthetic. It's made from a bio source originally.
Okay.
It's also a lot easier in Formula 2 and Formula 3 because they've all got the same engine.
Yep.
It's a single fuel supplier. So you make a fuel, you blend the fuel, you tune the engines to work on it. And to be honest, if it's not perfect, at least it's the same for everyone. But Formula 1 isn't like that. Formula 1 is about perfection. Formula 1 is about 6 different engines. It's about 5 different fuel companies. And it's about doing that job properly. So I said, right, I don't think we can do this till 2026, because at the moment we're using in Formula 1 about 750,000 litres of fuel a year. And to make 750,000 litres of sustainable fuel, you simply can't do it at the moment.
And that's just racing on the track?
No, to be honest, most of that actually is on the dynos and development.
Oh, really?
The amount on the track is less than that.
Yeah.
And I guess the interesting thing about cars on the track, our footprint, our CO2 footprint as a sport is just over 250,000 tons CO2 equivalent. The amount that relates to these cars running around the track is 0.7%. It's tiny. It's absolutely tiny. But what we're doing is we're showing a multiplier effect.
Yeah.
There are 1.4 billion vehicles on the road at the moment. By 2030, 2050, 2 billion, who knows? And what we're producing is what's called a drop-in fuel. So it's a fuel that's synthesized. It can go in the car without modifications, maybe a little tweak to the mapping, but you don't physically have to change your engine or anything. And that, I think, is a huge contribution that we make.
And this is why I think this is the most important development for Formula 1, because Formula 1 has always tried to be relevant, road relevance, and to come up with things. And we've praised it over the years, innovations in Formula 1 that now appear on road cars as well. If we can create as a sport a drop-in fuel, synthetic fuel, that is sustainable and is not damaging the planet, that can then get dropped into those billions of cars around the world, surely that makes Formula 1 more relevant than it ever was.
I think Formula 1 has always been relevant. I absolutely agree with you, and I'm not disagreeing at all. But I'll give you an example. When I was a kid, my dad used to take me to Snetterton to watch races. He loved racing as well.
Good dad.
He was a good dad. And we used to drive there in his various cars, but they would have 2 valves per cylinder, they'd have push rods, they'd have a carburetor. We'd arrive at the track, we'd look at these wonderful racing cars, these beautiful racing engines, which were all 4 valves per cylinder, overhead cam, fuel injection. Now, if I take my kids to watch a race, or my grandkids to watch a race, I'm driving a car that has 4 valves per cylinder, overhead cams, fuel injection. So we don't, in the sport, we don't say, right, actually, here's the next best thing, and we'll do it, and then you follow. We have always worked at the edges of efficiency. Efficiency wins races. Efficiency brings competitiveness. So we've always done it. I think this time it's a little bit more direct. Sometimes it's very indirect. I'll give you another example. We started off in the, I guess in the late 80s, into the 90s, we started really working with CFD. Now, CFD, which is computational fluid dynamics, the sort of wind tunnel on the computer, if you like, was really very, very basic in those days. But we needed to simulate a very, very complex mechanism, a racing car, rotating wheels, all this sort of turbulence around it. So we were really pushing the vendors of these CFD codes, the programs themselves, to really help us to model the turbulent flow better. Now, what happens years on, we start building wind farms. And if you want to simulate on a computer using CFD the flow around a single windmill, it's not too difficult. It's not easy, but it's not too difficult. When you have a whole farm of them and they're operating in turbulent wakes, and you then start thinking about things like wake steering and getting better performance from the windmill that's behind the one in front and things like that, they go back and they say, oh, the CFD codes look like they've already developed this sort of stuff. What have they done that for? Oh, they did it for Formula One.
Yeah.
And, you know,
I'd never
it's
thought
these
of that at all.
unintended consequences.
Wow. So where are we at then? 2026 seems like a long way away. We have a red flag out on the track. Hold that thought for a moment. And that's why we've got the red flag. You've got Valtteri Bottas in the Alfa Romeo, and he's come to a halt, which looks like mechanical issues down at turn 8. No, down at turn 1. No. See turn 1 on the screen?
Yeah,
that does
down towards
it.
8. You're right.
It is 8.
Crofty.
These things happen in testing. Pat, all those years ago when you were running cars with turbos, probably get 3 laps in and think we haven't had a red flag yet. We've done well here. Haven't we?
Yeah, but to be honest, isn't the reliability impressive these days? You know,
Just
three
be saying
days of
that, yeah.
testing before the season starts, and give or take a bit, these cars run round lap after lap after lap. They're
And that
really
very
impressive.
car stopped on track at the moment was a very common sight last year.
Yeah.
This time last year, it really struggled with the gearbox.
Let's
Wasn't
have a little listen.
Yeah.
I mean, it could be a run out fuel, but I doubt that's the sim.
That didn't sound very nice. It's
Stuck
still
in
got
gear.
gears.
No, he was stuck in gear. Sound like gearbox. You
Yeah.
were saying, I mean, they struggled with gearbox last year. But,
Yeah, whatever it
yeah.
was sudden, and it wasn't something they were trying to simulate on track. As part of a test, they'll always do a little run out, a fuel run out test.
Yeah, but you try and do those at the end of a session,
Yeah,
so
exactly.
you don't inconvenience your wonderful competitors who you try and help so much.
Yeah, they spend all year trying to annihilate each other, and then somehow they have this cordial agreement that we're going to be nice in testing. Yeah. Right, we'll get to the bottom of that. Ted will be down at Alfa Romeo to find out. And we're talking sustainable fuels, the future. And as you say, there are many sustainable fuels. There's algae as fuel. There's ethanol. There's sediment from the winemaking industry you were telling me about.
I think the World Endurance Championship uses that.
Yeah,
so they're 100% ethanol
Yeah.
For the racing, which sounds quite cool. But so what's the difference there between what you're trying to achieve in Formula One and
Okay,
and what they're doing?
sit down and get ready for a chemistry lesson.
Oh, I love
My
this.
son will be loving this
If
chat.
you'd have been
He
my-
loves
If
chemistry.
you'd have been my chemistry teacher, I'd have actually listened, to be fair.
Right, let's give it another go. Because I was terrible at chemistry at school, but I didn't really care back then because I was too busy focusing on a steering wheel of a go-kart.
Books at the ready. I'm going to take notes.
And you'll be tested
We'll be
afterwards.
tested later.
Yes.
Yeah.
Professor Pat.
But seriously, we call these fuels hydrocarbon fuels. So, clue there, hydrogen, carbon. And the sort of quality of the fuel you make is how you mix up your carbon and your hydrogen atoms. Now, each carbon atom wants 4 hydrogen atoms attached to it, but you can take one of them away and attach another carbon atom, blah, blah, blah. So the simplest sort of hydrocarbon, CH4, methane. The gas, the gas
It's got
that we have in our
the
house.
4 hydrocarbons.
Four
hydrogen
hydrogens,
pod-
one
yeah,
carbon.
yeah. 4 hydrogens, yeah.
Done.
Top of the class, please.
See what I could
Well
have
done,
been.
Ed.
Where would it have got you, eh?
But
There.
of course, it's not that simple. you start building up to these long carbon chains, which are the good fuels, the gasolines and things like that. And, even those, depending on how you actually attach the atoms, you get different properties. So it gets more and more complex. The great thing with when we get to things like gasoline, isooctane, there's sort of 8 carbon atoms and even above that, is you get an awful lot of energy in them. So you take a kilogram of gasoline, it has 43 megajoules of energy in it. That's an awful lot of energy.
Yeah.
When you go to your ethanols and things, which are the lower carbon, they don't have that amount of energy. So you're going to have more volume of fuel going into your engine.
Why do they have less?
Simply because they don't have the long carbon chains.
Yeah.
Okay. So
they've not got as much stuff in there that burns as much.
Yeah, ethanol's slightly different because it actually has an oxygen molecule on there as well. So it's in fact those sort of fuels are called oxygenates because they have the oxygen in them, whereas gasoline requires the oxygen to come in from the air to help it.
That's why rockets use oxygen as energy as well.
Yeah, exactly.
So can I assume then that one of your big problems is that to go with a lot of the sustainable fuels that are out there, we'll need rocket-sized tanks on the side of the cars because you need that much more fuel to complete a distance.
It's not quite that bad,
extreme,
but absolutely. If you're running 100% ethanol or methanol or one of those oxygenate fuels, you will need more of it. As indeed you do with your road fuel with the E10.
And you'll have less power. Will the engine lose power?
It depends. If you totally just put it in the engine, all you have to do is just flow a little bit more fuel in there and then you'll get the same energy out. Now, what we've done with the 2026 fuel is we've said, so we think that's the way things are going, so we will follow that. So what we've done is we've tried to produce a set of regulations that they mandate a fully sustainable fuel, and we trace this all the way down. So, how it's made, we look at the full life cycle analysis of the carbon budget, etc. We accept that putting in something like ethanol is actually quite good because it's quite cheap, and that's a good thing. So, we anticipate that 20% of the fuel is going to be one of these oxygenate type fuels like ethanol or something like that. And then the rest is going to be the more complex molecules that give you the very high energy density. But the important thing is it is a drop-in fuel. Now, when I was first thinking about what the 2026 car should look like, I was actually thinking about a sort of co-optimization of the engine and the fuel. If we're going to make a fuel, then we can make what we want. We can make an engine that will exploit it. But the fuel manufacturers and the engine manufacturers came back and said it would be much better if actually you produce what we call a drop-in fuel, and you show the world that actually you can synthesize this fuel, you put it in your car and you drive off. So that's what we're doing. We're producing, yes, it's a reasonably high performance fuel, but we're encouraging the pathways to manufacturing it to be different. So if people want, the real trick is where you get the carbon from.
Yeah.
So you can get that from algae, you mentioned, you can get it from direct air,
carbon
capture from the air, carbon capture, get it from waste, which is probably the preferred route at the moment. And in order to ensure that we encourage these different methodologies, but we don't end up with someone making a fuel that's massively better, we've changed the way we regulate the use of the fuel. So at the moment, there is a regulation which states that you cannot flow into your engine more than 100 kilograms of fuel an hour. What we're doing is we're saying, forget about the kilograms, let's talk about energy. The world is energy. Currency is energy these days. That is the new currency. So what we're doing is we're saying 33,000 megajoules of energy an hour. That's what you can flow in. Now, if that requires
33 megajoules an hour.
33,000.
33,000 megajoules.
So if you have a fuel that requires you to then flow, let's say 70 kilograms of that particular fuel an hour and another fuel that's 72, that doesn't matter. The fact is everyone's got the same energy, and it's then how you use that energy that matters. So as well as producing sustainable fuel, we're encouraging people to A, use different manufacturing paths, and B, still use it as efficiently as you possibly can.
This is absolutely fascinating. We've got about 2 more minutes with you, so we're going to have to be brief here. Are you going to achieve it? Are we going to have this by 2026?
Yes.
When we've got that drop in fuel for our Formula One cars, does that drop in fuel then get used in every other way that Formula One needs to come racing? The trucks that come to the circuit, encourage people to use them in their cars to come to the circuit, the generators that are used, the planes, etc., that are carrying us around the world?
Well, as I said, the problem is finding the molecules. Now, actually, with the trucks and the generators, we're already doing a lot of that because it's a lot easier to synthesize a diesel than it is a gasoline type fuel. So already a lot of that is happening. Aircraft, a lot of people talk about SAF, Sustainable Aviation Fuel, SAF. It's coming in, it's being tested. Again, if you imagine how much fuel is used in aircraft, the process of making it, we're still many, many years away. But yeah, we'll be demonstrating it. And of course, if we've had to wait till 2026 to make enough fuel for us to run in Formula One cars, don't think that by 2027 every car in the world can use this fuel. But what you can do is you can start blending it. Yeah. So, you know, in Europe at the moment, we went from 5% ethylene to 10% ethylene. There's nothing to stop us going to 15% ethylene. There's nothing to stop us going to 10% ethylene plus 5% of synthetic fuel. And then when enough becomes available, 10% of synthetic fuel. So we can keep blending and we can sort of introduce this. And we really do keep it because we are not we're not adding any new carbon to the atmosphere. All we're doing is recycling it. We're taking the carbon that's been captured in the waste, captured in the wood chippings, whatever it might be. It's new carbon. It's carbon that was there. It's gone into vegetation or algae or whatever it is, or we've captured it direct from the air. We're using it, we're putting it back. Then we're grabbing it again, we're using it, we're putting it back. It's fully circular.
Might this be the most important thing you've done for this sport?
I hope it's a bit of a legacy. I mean, I'm quite proud of what we've done with the 2022 car that we now see as a 2023 car. No, that's about close racing. It's not aesthetic. It looks, of course,
but
it
in
looks
terms of the
properly.
worldwide, great racing keeps us entertained on a Sunday, and you know it's our livelihoods, and we love it. And people watching love what they're seeing on the track. But when we're being relevant and when we're looking to actually make a difference to planet Earth, this to me feels a little bit more important than getting one car to follow another one more closely.
You're right. And, you know, I've had a long career in Formula One, done many things, won championships, enjoyed all that side of it. I've enjoyed getting into the sort of advising on regulations, working on other things, but I'm passionate about lots of things. Yeah. I'm passionate about motor racing. I'm passionate about engineering, and I'm passionate about climate change. So I actually think, this is worth doing.
Jongle says, I could listen to the great Pat Simmons for days. His voice and knowledge makes him a Sir David Attenborough of Formula One. And I say that with the greatest of respect for both legends. Thank you, Pat, for all your input for F1 to date. It's not exactly Blue Planet, it's Green Planet, right?
That's right.
This is how it's going to work. And thank you for joining us.
No, it's fascinating, Pat.
We had a bit of time, because it was testing, to actually delve into this a bit more seriously. And I think we'll continue to delve throughout the year, if that's okay, and years to come. But good luck, keep going. And let me know when I can get some of that more greener fuel, you know? And also, if you can help my son with his chemistry mulch, that'd be really helpful as well.
Second-hand books.
That's what it needs. Pat Simmons, thank you so much indeed.
Thanks to both of you.
That was utterly fascinating, and I'm with you, John. I could actually listen to Pat for days, and have done so over many days as well. He doing an awful lot of good for the future, as we aim to be net carbon zero by 2030. By the way, my son is in his mocks at the moment. He's doing very well with his chemistry. He just needs Professor Pat to take him to another level on that.
And it just goes to show the world needs geeks.
Yeah, absolutely. Geeks shall inherit the earth.
Geeks rule the world.
No, they absolutely do. Once asked Andy Cowell, the former MD at Brixworth, HPP for Mercedes, on on behalf of my son and his chemistry lesson, could you run a Formula One engine on, for want of a better word, poo, right? Because it's a hydrocarbon. And he said, actually, yes, we could, and here's how it could work, which was the greatest chemistry lesson I think Daniel ever had, and inspired him to a little bit more on that one. If I could remember what Andy said, I'd relay it all to you, but I can't. Luckily, though, we have another expert in the commentary box to tell us about driving. Pietro Fittipaldi, the reserve driver at the Haas team, is grinning and smiling and is joining us in the commentary box. How are you?
Yeah, very good. Happy to be here. Pretty exciting days of testing, a lot going on with the team and trying to make the car a little bit better. It's super tight in the midfield. So to get that jump ready for the first race is going to be very important. But yeah, I was out on track, very hot as usual here in Bahrain, but exciting stuff.
Does it feel hotter out there today than it was yesterday around the same time?
It definitely feels hotter today. At least for me, I was out there this morning around 11:30, and it was... sun's very hot.
So what's that doing therefore to the car? What have you heard from the drivers in the team or the driver today so far?
Yeah, I mean, the biggest thing, I wouldn't say the temperature was like causing so many, let's say, issues or car balance differences, but the wind is something crazy here. I mean, the wind, when it changes from morning to afternoon, you get guys, commentating like completely different car balances, and it switches a lot from the morning to the afternoon. It almost does like a 180 direction, and then you have different car balance in different corners, and that's when it starts getting tricky.
So tightly packed midfield as we look at Nico out on the track at the moment. Where do you think that Haas is? Because you see, we've been busting all the jargon
on the main straight.
On the main straight, well done. That would have been the Gunther Steiner answer. So you can do the team principal bit. We get always
just trying to bide you a bit more time here.
We've got more to work on. We're going through a program. We're not sure what our competitors are doing. We get various things from all the teams here. But you, as a reserve driver, talk to all the other drivers in the paddock, and you all have your little gossips at the end of the day, so you know what's going on. Where do you think that Haas is?
So the main thing in testing is it's hard to see where the other cars are because
he's been
no. Listen, I'm
not
going around the question. I'm going to get to it, but it's hard to understand, fuel loads and stuff that the guys are doing. So obviously, you have an engineer that looks at strategy and race simulation, and they kind of simulate what fuel loads the other teams are running. So you can kind of get a basis on competitiveness. And I think that we're, man, it's hard to say, but I'd say we're out of the 10 teams, between 7th and maybe 5th.
Wow.
Around that area. But it's super tight. So I think if you get the car, not in the right window in terms of balance and stuff, you can end up falling down to 8th.
But I'm really glad you said between 5th and 7th there, because I was doing a provisional pecking order earlier today, and I think you've had a better test than McLaren, and I think the Haas team are a little bit above McLaren at the moment. Is that fair?
I mean, if you're saying it, it's pretty fair, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, just from what we've seen so far, I'd say that the Aston Martin looks like it's the faster car. It's George Russell about to overtake down the main straight. But the Aston Martin looks like it's got the legs at the moment on the Haas. But certainly has ahead of the McLaren just from what we've seen so far. And both long runs and the short runs, performance runs, it looks like a pretty versatile car. It looks like they're able to place it where they want, and it works in all conditions. But I would agree. Maybe not even as low as 7th. I would think it's I reckon it's 5th. I would say 5th.
Yeah, I was keeping it just kind of keeping the window open, but I do agree with you. The Aston Martin, going out on track and watching them, very impressive.
Yeah,
like super stable car, very consistent as well. Not really having major issues in terms of balance, and like that on all 3 days of testing. So I think they're one of the dark horses.
They're
can surprise
I think it's
you.
fair to say they're the team that's made most progress from where they ended last year coming into this year straight away. But where do you see, because every track's different, as we know, and where would you say the Haas car, where would you say its strengths are in terms of where it finds its grip? The slow speed corners, the high speed corners, higher downforce, lower downforce, where does it like I say, it's quite versatile, but every car has its sweet spot.
I think the Haas car is very good with higher downforce
Right.
stuff. So I think that higher speed corners and stuff, I think that's where we're good. That's where we performed well last year, higher downforce tracks, and we seem to struggle a little bit more on the lower downforce. That's something that we were working on for this season. So you can see the car breaking into turn one. Super tricky over here when you get tailwind into turn one. Very hard to get the car stopped and rotated, and the locking the front inside wheel quite a bit. But yeah, I'd say the high speed and higher downforce stuff, that's where I think, our car is super strong. And we need to work on the car on a little bit, lower downforce tracks.
Was that the same last year as well? You were a bit draggy when it came to the lower downforce circuits.
Yeah, I would say that's kind of because the car didn't change. It's not a new generation car. Those are the comments kind of from last year, and obviously that's what the emphasis is on this year, and trying to improve those areas. Like kind of top speed and getting a bit less drag on the car. I think that was something important over the off season that the guys are trying to work on.
Just riding on board here, Pietro, it looks like Nico's got very good rotation in the car, the way it can pivot around the corner in the very slow speed, like turn 10. We've seen a lot of cars understeering there, even carrying lockups, and that's something we actually saw from this car early on. Has that been worked on through the test? Have they focused on he's smiling.
No, we're testing a lot of things, and obviously I think today, we had some positive feedback. So I think it's in a good window. Obviously, always more to work on. But you're very right. There are a lot of cars that on the slow speed corners, I mean, you can see that the car just understeers, because you have to remember these Formula One cars, they're almost like 800 kilos. They're very, not very heavy, but they are heavy cars, and they're very long and wide. So when you're going through the corner, it takes a while to actually get the car rotated. And if you have like a snap or an understeer, everything happens a little bit slower than the previous generation F1 cars. At least when I drove it, that's how I felt. So the car is it's a big car, it's a big car, and it takes a lot to get the car around and stopped. It's not easy.
They're not going to get any smaller or lighter in the near future either. I think they're only going to continue to get heavier, especially when the new power units come in 2026, because there'll be more batteries on them for a start. I'm talking to designers and talking to engineers, the era of heavy Formula One cars are here to stay, I'm afraid.
Yeah, I think for the looks of it, I like the bigger cars because they look aggressive, they look fast, but obviously when you're driving it, it's not as agile, I think, as the older Formula One cars. I think when you used to race or tested the Formula One cars as well, and back a couple years ago, I think they were much I'd say funner to drive. I think
they were more, definitely more nimble, more agile, but then you were on the groove tires, and that always felt a bit strange. So I think the perfect combination would have been the lightweight, the smaller car with the slick tires that they enjoy today. But in saying that, they had a lot less downforce because there was a lot less surface area of the car. So there was less you could do to create that downforce. So they have an exceptional amount of load, as the engineers call it, going through the axles on the car from the floor, pulling the car down with the ground effects, and just, like Pietro was saying, the size of the car allows it. It's like flying a huge kite through the air. It's just
it's exactly it's like stuck to the ground, but it does take a while to get it. I mean, it's a huge car, but it's stuck.
While we're watching Felipe Drugovich and the current cream of cars out on the track, wouldn't it be great to compare it, as you were saying, Pietro, with those old cars, those more nimble cars that were racing? Maybe we could pick a lap from, say, 2008 when... you were driving, Anthony. Look, on board now. I recognise the crash helmet because thankfully he never changed it. So take us through, gentlemen, this lap.
Well, first of all, listen to the sound of the engine.
I was about to say that. That's very exciting.
I was on the soft tyres there. You can see that. See the groove tyres there. You could draw the stripe in the middle. Yeah, you see immediately how much more agile the car is,
and it's much twitchier. But when you have twitches, you can correct it really quick.
Look how much bigger the circuit looks as well, because the car is so narrow.
Look like you have more space. It was a wider track.
And we had, on this particular car, this was the first year we went to non-traction controlled as well. Look at all the rubber that gets flicked up from the tyres as well when you go offline. So coming down to turn 8. Look at the agility. I didn't even have to use all the width of the track to get it to the apex that I wanted.
It looks like a miniature, doesn't it? compared to what we see now. Did you hit the apex here?
Yeah, he did. He did it pretty well. He did it well.
But it's when the car gets to the mid corner point, it's the minimum speed you can get. It's almost like a go-kart, isn't it? How a little bit of rear end instability, which is rare to see on one of these cars, because again they've got so much downforce into turn 11. And even in turn 12, it's twitchy because you haven't got that downforce the whole time. The car's kind of like dating around.
Yeah, and it looks like you can hustle these cars.
Yeah,
the previous generation cars a lot more. I mean, you can be kind of lively on the wheel, where nowadays everything happens a bit slower on the wheel.
I think
you're pretty loose over there.
Looking at but that's how these cars were. And again, because of the groove tires, it rolled around on all of those edges. It was almost like the feeling, you know, when you're on a set of intermediate tires in a really dry condition, it's just like always moving on it. That's interesting to see the same track as well, because it hasn't changed.
So here's the question: where do you think you qualified with that lap? Because it actually looked like a really good lap.
To last,
you were hustling it. You know, you were hitting apexes. You were doing everything as a driver you could possibly do, and you reckon you were
quali lap.
Quali lap, yeah.
I've seen mistakes. I could have been better. I think I was second to last. No?
You were second to last. You out-qualified your teammate.
Like we said, that's the most important thing. The first person you have to beat is your teammate.
But we were actually saying yesterday, Pietro, that there are times, and you must feel this as well, that you do a lap, you think, oh, that's brilliant. I couldn't have done any more than that. Now, the critical Davidson
I wouldn't have said it was brilliant.
Will say that there were mistakes on that. But you think that I've done absolutely everything. And then you look at the times, you think, oh, no, I'm still really slow, aren't I? Because you're always influenced by the car that you're driving.
Yeah, that's the worst feeling for a driver. When you feel like you maximize everything, you look at the lap time, you're like, I'm still like a second off. And then
6 seconds ahead of your teammate there.
Jeez.
I must have had a problem.
That's flying, man.
Yeah.
Flying.
Oh, you were that good.
But the thing that's interesting there, I see good parts from the car, and bad parts as well. So we picked up on the tire, the groove tires. I really don't think that was a great step for Formula One, and what we were saying earlier on as well in terms of the whole road relevance thing. It's we burnt through tires so quickly back then, and it wasn't very sustainable doing that. It was irresponsible, really, in many ways. But I see that the car, it's too twitchy in many ways. I didn't, in some moments, I didn't like that twitchiness, particularly in the high speed. I like I've driven, say, the W12, so the 2021 Mercedes, and it feels to me much more like a sports car, how we would feel a sports car, bigger, heavier car, but with a lot of downforce. And those moments in high speed, that's when these particular cars really come alive. And you can be smoother in many ways. You have to kind of, you just maneuver the car around rather than, like you said, hustling it around. And it just depends on which style you have. But I see elements of these cars, which I prefer in many ways. I prefer the amount of downforce they have. And like I often say, downforce is your friend as a driver.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree with you. The only thing, like with these big cars, I think when you have a moment, the moments are a lot bigger. Like in a high speed, if you're going to catch the car, sometimes it's going to be a bit harder to catch.
Yeah.
If it swings out too much, you're not going to catch it. It's too heavy.
We see that a lot, though, don't we? Sometimes the rear goes, there's no chance of catching it whatsoever. The driver's a bit of a passenger at that stage.
Yeah, you try. You go like maximum counter steer, but then whips the other way and straight in the wall.
It's like a high side on a motorbike, isn't it? It's just going to come back the other way. There was a few moments for Albon there in turn 13, just fighting the wheel.
Talking of coming alive, this year, 70%, I think, of the Haas car was built and produced in Italy, and then 30% back at Banbury, which is the most it's been so far. There's more input from Banbury than over in Italy. New sponsors have come onto the team as well. Title sponsor, more money coming into the team. Do you see this year that this might be the year that Haas start to come alive a little bit, that the resources are there, both in Italy and at Banbury, and the money is there to go with it?
I think, yeah, that's very important, just for us to be able to hit that budget cap, getting a new title sponsor in Formula One is very important. Ooh, that's a pretty big moment there.
Yeah,
a rear lockup.
If you try and hustle one of these cars, that's what you get.
It hustles back at you.
Just a bit.
Wow.
Yeah.
So in which case then, hopefully results for the team will come with it. Where are you working with the team to ensure those results do get better? your test and reserve driver, but not much testing going on through the season. So what are you doing?
Yeah, so obviously because there's a testing ban, wasn't like back in the day there was a race team and a test team, which honestly I would have enjoyed that a lot more because it would have meant I would have been in the car a lot more often. Now you only have, let's say, 5 days of testing in total for everybody between the 2 drivers and myself. So when I do get to test, it's about making sure I'm ready on the pace from the beginning and trying to help the team with the feedback. A lot of the work we do is on the simulator as well. And when I'm trackside, instead of just sitting around and kind of just following, I've been doing a lot with just looking at telemetry and throughout the race weekends, helping passing on info to the race engineer in terms of from a driver's point of view. So we have the onboards of all the cars. We have GPS data, so I can compare Kevin versus Valtteri Bottas during a qualifying run, and before he goes out, it'd be listen, this corner we can try to carry more minimum speed or something like that. So we do some of that stuff, and for me as a driver it's good too because I'm always learning things from the outside, and I'm still racing. I'm doing full-time WEC and IMSA, so it's a busy schedule, and what I do in Formula One also helps me a lot.
Yeah, which is good to see. I like the fact that you get to compare Kevin or Nico with other drivers on the grid and analyze that and then make suggestions as well. And I'm assuming that happens across all the teams. And it's used as very much a learning process rather than well, by the way, he's half a second quicker than you through corners 1, 2, and 3. It's not going to demoralize the drivers in any way, and that you get that input with Kevin and Nico, with Nico, who on the subject of what's he brought a new energy into the team a little bit. Now he's coming back again for another stint in F1.
Yeah, I think it's good that he got track time last year with Aston Martin, and bringing some kind of different feeling, because I think when you've been driving for the same team, the same car, the concepts or philosophy stay pretty similar. So I remember first time we did the postseason test last year together, I was in one car, Nico was in the other, and he immediately felt some differences compared to the Aston Martin, and that input was very good, as well as different powertrains, so different ways that the drivability of the engines are and stuff. So
it's interesting. I've been there before as a driver. It's one of the most interesting times for a debrief as a driver when you've changed teams. Everybody's suddenly interested to hear what you have to say about every element of the car. They hang on your every word, don't they?
No, that's very true, because it's you don't usually get a driver coming from Mercedes powertrain then going to a Ferrari. So there's a lot of differences. You think, oh, they're all Formula One cars, but they're all built completely, in very different ways under a certain regulation, but everybody brings a different idea on how to maximize each part on the car. So they handle differently on track as well.
It's funny, when I drove that Mercedes last year, Crofty, the W12, it felt like a Brackley car that I had known my whole time as an F1 driver. Yeah, it just, I can't put my finger on what it was. There wasn't one specific element. It just felt like it had the DNA of that Brackley team. Really strange. And you sit in another car from another team, and of course it's going to feel different. What are we looking at here?
See a hand waving in the air in a moment from George Russell, aren't we, behind the Ferrari of Charles Leclerc. He's picking up a decent toe.
Well, this is all interesting, though. I think it like we were just saying, it's interesting for drivers as well to get an eye against the different team, different car on track, and understand where the strengths and weaknesses might be from your package compared to theirs, and vice versa. And that little moment he's had there will surely be discussed in the briefing later on.
Charles going to get him back. I dare say he's got DRS down the straight.
He did the right thing there.
Just to close up and then let him go a bit.
He didn't have the pace. It's a different program, different tyres as well. He didn't have the pace, but he thought, I'm not going to be a fool here and just re-overtake him and then be in the way again for the rest of that. He's done the right thing. Maybe he's on an in-lap, but that shows good respect as well.
Pietro and I would have dived down the inside of the
you definitely
overtake. Would. Speed.
Best career finish.
Yeah, is he going to get a podium?
I hope so. I think that'd be great for the team. We got the pole position last year, and now we just need a podium. So
That was without doubt one of the big highlights of last season. Kevin and Gunter striding down the pit lane, as Haas got pole position in Sao Paulo. What a place to get a pole position as well.
And it's always so difficult to get a pole position. Sometimes I'd say maybe even more difficult than a win, because a win, you need a lot to happen to be able to get a win if you're not, with a very good team. And in qualifying, for example, it's everybody out at the same time. And we made it to Q3 and we went out. We were the first ones to go out of the pits, and then boom, red flag after, and you got the pole position.
Oh, it's mega.
It still counts.
You know what? And vitally important as well, because of course we've got Nico coming into the team. Now Nico and Kevin can have their own chat about pole position around Interlagos in Formula One. That could have been a very one-sided conversation in Nico's favour otherwise. The guy's starting on parity with that one. Have you ever got pole at Interlagos?
At Interlagos, no. I never had a pole. I had a race there last year in Brazilian stock car where we started 32nd and I finished 5th. That was my only race there.
Yeah, good effort.
That was my only race there.
Seriously competitive field. You thought Formula One was competitive between the drivers?
Yeah, the Brazilian stock car is very competitive.
Oh, yeah.
If you were 32nd, how many cars were there in the race?
There was 33 cars.
Right.
We had
you and Anna got something in common there as well.
Yeah.
Qualifying second last. I like this. We've got parity here. 33 cars going around Interlagos.
33 cars. We had an issue in qualifying, but started from the back, and it was really cool. I was racing together with Tony Kanaan. We were in the same car.
Nice.
So super cool.
What's the field separated by?
It's very close. It's like within probably 8 tenths, maximum 7 tenths.
33 cars, 8 tenths. If we can get Formula One to that stage, imagine.
33 cars.
Well, no, just
mega.
The whole field covered by 8 tenths.
I think you're absolutely right. Also, there's not much room on the track for 33 cars at Interlagos. You're lapping people quite quickly, I'd have thought, on that one. Although they are separated by 8 tenths.
Going back to Nico, I spotted on the onboard, he's resting his head around the exit of turn 11. And just looking at George Russell there. I mean, all the drivers come out of winter. They try their best and to be race fit, like you said, for yourself. As a reserve, you try to be race fit, but it's an impossible task until you're actually in the thing.
Yeah, it's impossible. Every time you have an off season, you do the most you can to try to keep your neck in shape, but then you get in, first day you're in the car, the next day you're extremely sore. People don't realize you take painkillers at night to make sure you wake up with your neck being able to turn from one side to the other.
On that subject, obviously at Aston Martin, Lance is injured at the moment, and we're waiting to see if he's going to be able to race next weekend. And you've got Felipe Drugovich, very able reserve driver. You've got Stoffel Van Dorn, very able reserve driver. A little rumour in the paddock that Sebastian Vettel did actually throw his hat into the ring and say, no, if you need me, I could be available as well. It's just a rumour. I've not had that confirmed by anyone at Aston Martin, who I'm told said, it's okay, we're covered for this. But I'm not surprised they said it's okay, because on the subject of, training your neck and stuff, Seb wouldn't have been doing any pre-season preparation for coming into Formula One. And despite being a full-time world champion and only just retiring, you need to be building up to this, don't you?
Yeah, you do. I mean, if you're first time you get in, if you've been months, kind of without trainer, without being in the car, at least you have Friday where, you have Friday, I got 2 practices, Saturday you have another practice, and you're able to kind of build up to it, for the race and make sure you don't get too tired, but at least build your neck, kind of wake it up before you actually go into the race. Because qualifying and practice is fine, but it's more the race when you're out there for almost 2 hours that it starts giving out. And it gives out a lot in their braking. People think it's only in the corners, but these cars, the stopping power of the Formula One cars are so incredible that in their braking, sometimes you can't hold your head back and you can't see the corner because your head's forward.
If you're going down the main straight here, as we were with Alex Albon, and you're braking at what, just beyond the 150 marker board? So
I think it's like 110 maybe.
Yeah, 110. Yeah, so you see the board and just beyond it, hit the brakes, and then you're going to hit the apex and you're going to slow down from 190 miles an hour to about 65 miles an hour through there.
It is, yes. That's about minimum speed of one.
That is a huge amount of deceleration in a very short time.
Yeah, that's what makes it. So for me, that's what I try to focus on the most, because everybody, they focus on the front of the neck, the sides, but when like you said, Nico was resting his head on the headrest. So you can put these pads on your headrest that when you're making the corner, you can just lean your head. I mean, you don't have to be a hero and try to hold your head without using the pads. I mean, you just rest your head on the pad and you can see the corner. But what you don't have is under braking. If your neck, and I've had it before, if it gets too tired, you have nothing to hold your neck or to support it under braking.
Horrible feeling. I've been there myself.
Horrible.
Really. I mean, it's such an alien concept to describe to most people, isn't it? And it's one thing is that only Formula One drivers that have done it in the past or currently can all agree on that. Yeah, you get out of into an F1 car after the winter break. It's always quite literally a pain in the neck.
It is
a
very
few days
much.
after. And it's it's kind of like the worst part on your body to be aching. Everyone's been to the gym and felt those that delayed muscle.
And you wake up the next morning all
Yeah.
stiff and stuff. It's like headache. It's terrible.
My favorite story. You might like this one because Enrique Benoldi. Remember that guy?
Yeah.
We did a 3-day test at Mugello. Mugello, yeah, very tough tracks like Suzuka. And on the third morning, he wakes up. He's having breakfast and he's got his head in his hands, holding his head over his bowl of cereal. He can't hold his head up. He was absolutely destroyed and he could only do half the day.
But I completely believe that. I know how it is. Like your head, even after driving the day after, just feels like 3 times heavier. Just because your muscles are just destroyed.
I tell you what, as painful and as destroyed as your neck would be, the pair of you would not swap that for anything.
No.
And you will put up with the pain. Pietro, thanks for coming up. It's been brilliant to talk Haas, Next, and the rest as well. Good luck this season. Just before you go, a couple of FP1 sessions coming your way this year?
We'll see later on in the year, but obviously I'd love to get back in the car. I did Mexico and Abu Dhabi last year, and I always feel very confident when I jump in on pace off the bat. So hopefully I get some more time, and I'm doing full WEC in IMSA, so it's going to to be pretty busy.
Good luck this season, mate.
Cool. Thanks, guys.
Thanks very much.
Fittipaldi with us in the commentary box. Cheers, dude. And we've got 38 and a half minutes to go of this session. And I make no apologies for the fact you've been watching the pictures and we've been having, conversations about other things, because it is testing and it gives us a time to talk about an awful lot of stuff that is relevant and is behind the scenes and give you a bit of an insight. But luckily for us, we have people that watch the action while we're chatting away, who keep us up to date with everything that's going on. And Rachel Brooks is now looking at me going, no, I wasn't. Hello, Rachel Brooks.
I was trying to arrange some interviews in the paddock, and then I was stood behind you for a while listening to your conversation intently because it was so interesting. I clearly didn't look at the screen. No. Has that worked? No, I can't multitask at all. I'm really sorry. I have a letdown.
I was
hoping
everywhere. That she was. What has been happening is a lot of long runs have been taking place in the last hour. And we saw that Leclerc-Russell exchange, shall we say, different tyres, you mentioned it, and different stages of the tyre graining process. So yeah, absolutely right, Charles Leclerc shouldn't have dived down the inside on that one. And don't go thinking for a minute that the Mercedes is suddenly faster than the Ferrari, because they were on different tyres, different programs.
There's just so much degradation around this track. It's incredibly high at the best of times, let alone when the temperature's like it is at the moment. And when we were riding on board with Nico actually earlier on, instead of just noticing his neck had gone, I was noticing how conservatively he was taking particularly the high-speed corners, really backing out of it, nursing those tyres around for all they were worth, and the grips just departing lap after lap after lap.
The one thing I did notice, Crofty, was Valtteri Bottas out of the car in his shorts, in his T-shirt, and his baseball cap while they work on the car at Alfa Romeo, which looked like they were out till lunchtime.
I'm pretty sure that was gearbox.
Mm. And he had enough of those issues last year, didn't he?
Yeah. Well, I just picked up, I think he was talking to Mara from Sky Italia, and he was saying, I just lost drive. But it sounded gearboxy, didn't it? And it seemed to be stuck in gear as well. And then Valtteri came out, there was a wall of mechanics stopping anyone looking in while they worked on the Alfa Romeo. So the photographers and the reporters were taking pictures of the wall of mechanics because they couldn't take pictures of anything else.
Well, we had used to have the screens, didn't we? I mean, at least the screens have gone, but now it's a case of every mechanic on site blocking your view of the car while they work on it.
You know, we were talking about Sterling Moss a lot
Yeah.
earlier. I'm so glad that I follow Matt Bishop, former McLaren and Aston Martin Director of Communications and marvellous author, amongst many other things. He puts out on this day on social media. Tony Brooks, born today, who of course shared the British Grand Prix win at Aintree in 1957 with Sterling Moss. So
Not my dad, Tony Brooks. Although there was confusion throughout my life. People think my dad is the Tony Brooks racing driver. But he doesn't have an E in his surname, does he, Tony Brooks, the racing driver?
Yeah. Oh, well.
So we have an E. He didn't.
He didn't. When's your dad's birthday?
April the 20th.
Well, happy birthday for April the 20th.
Thanks very much.
to the other Tony Brooks.
Thank you. He used to have a garage at a car dealership, and so the name above it was Tony Brooks, which I'm sure helped actually sell quite a few cars.
My wife's granddad was called John Surtees.
Really?
I think we've discovered a new topic here: relations with famous names.
Here we go. Twitter's going to explode.
This is a Twitter post I never thought I'd do. But if you have a name share with a famous racing driver, please, I want to hear it now. Yeah.
The old one of the older press officers at Jaguar Racing back then was called Jane Stewart. Spelt the same as the Jackie Stewart, yeah. And whenever she had books coming from the Grand Prix, she'd board an aircraft, and Miss Stewart, Miss Stewart, oh yeah. So and because it's just the surname, they would sometimes upgrade her, thinking that it was Jackie. That Jay Stewart has just boarded them.
Brilliant.
Name shares with famous Grand Prix drivers that have got you upgrades wherever in this world. I want to know it now at Crofty F1. And thank you to everybody who was tweeting in to say how much they enjoyed Pat Simmons giving Ant and I a chemistry lesson and talking about sustainable fuels and the future in that area. Like you, I found it absolutely enthralling. And I really believe this is a properly vital thing that F1 should be doing and could have a huge impact. Set people a challenge in F1, you'd be amazed the impact that it can have in a very much shorter space of time. But it will, I could listen to Pat all day long. Like I could listen to this man all day long as well. Down at McLaren, Ted Kravitz.
Hello, Crofty. Hello, Rachel. Hello, Anthony. Hello, everybody. Yes, Tazio Nuvolari here with the latest from the pit lane.
And where did that get you upgraded?
But, absolutely nowhere. But now we've got the angle grinder out on the McLaren. You see the little grinder getting rid of the excess bonding that's been strengthening these little wheel barrows. And if it wasn't hot enough down here in the pit lane as we nudge towards 30 degrees, even though I think the temperature officially says it's only 26. Does it, Crofty? But it feels much hotter than that.
It says air temperature 27.8 and track temperature 42.9.
Yeah, but they've had the heater. That wasn't hot enough for McLaren. They've had the heater out to strengthen the bond that they've had to do, strengthening these wheel brows that have curtailed their running. So I would put it down to as an annoyance, nowhere near the block of times that McLaren missed around this time last year with the brake problem. But that was getting towards a bit of a panic and a real situation. This is more of an annoyance. It's cost them some time. They've had to make the fix, strengthen up those fairings, those front wheel fairings, the brows you like to call them. And it's meant that only now can Oscar Piastri actually get into the car and get about his business. Not missing too much in terms of relevance of the day. We've seen Sergio Perez now, the Red Bull. He was out on a brand new set of C3s, I believe, Crofty. It was the yellow tyre with the full markings. So bear that in mind on his run. That's a brand new set. I think you're seeing the Williams out there as well. The Mercedes of George Russell is on its stands, not going anywhere. And up and down, I think we see a little bit of the calm before the storm, guys. I think the storm will be later this afternoon while everybody does a practice qualifying and then goes straight into a practice race. So we're just seeing the last remnants now of the data gathering and then trying out some bits in this unrepresentative track conditions.
Thank you very much, Ted. D Money says, my grandpa's name is Sterling Moss. I don't know.
Wow.
Quite called Sterling Moss. Oliver, I share a last name with Sir Sterling Moss. It got me free lunches and several dates during my college years. Marvellous. My cat is called Button. Does that count? No, Sarah, it doesn't. But Crazy Scorsese says, F1 names? Yeah. I used to live in Airtown Centre.
Oh, dear. That
No?
is he related to you? Because that's a you joke, that one.
No, I think that's brilliant. Airtown Centre.
Does sound like Crofty's just totally made that up.
Doesn't it?
Yeah.
It's
The
like
kind
he's
of
been
chat-
thinking.
yeah, it's like
the
the
whole
chat we
way
have.
through the TED chat, he was thinking of it, wasn't he?
Yeah,
He was trying to come up with one.
It was a genuine tweet. Megan says, my surname is Hamilton. When my mum was pregnant with my little sister, she said if it was a boy, the name was going to be Lewis Carl Hamilton. My dad's name is Carl. But she had a girl. Oh, so close. So close. Couldn't be dealing with people thinking we completely copied Lewis's name. No.
Could have been a Louisa Carla Hamilton.
Not an F1 driver, but my granddad says Harry was called Basil Fox. He was a great fan of motor racing. Basil Fox, ladies and gentlemen. What a great name. My granddad's name was called Basil as well, to be fair. My first name is Nicky and my middle name is Emerson. Says Nicky Denton. I'm joined together with two great drivers there. We like that. I share my name with two-time F1 champ Graham Hill, says Graham. Was a great topic of distraction whilst getting vaccinated as a child in Ireland. Oh, love it. Wow. And Simon says, I knew a Jensen Button at uni, but he drove a 106, can't be a F1 spec. Keep them coming in.
See what could have been Jensen.
Yeah.
I'm gonna have to ask him. I'm sure Jensen's driven something like a 106 at
We
some
had this
stage
conversation,
in his life.
about people's first cars, didn't we? I'm sure we did it at a race last year. We had a conversation trying to find out everyone's first cars.
Didn't he buy a Ferrari when he first came into F1?
Sounds like Jensen.
He did, yeah.
He did, didn't
it was
he?
a 355, wasn't it? 335? 355,
You would,
was it?
wouldn't you?
335.
Here's my first big paycheck. Oh, what have you done with it? Invested it for the future? No, I bought a Ferrari.
He still got it.
Has he?
Yeah, he still got it.
There you go. So the Ferrari's on the track, George Russell in the garage, and we have 28 and a half minutes to go of this session, and as Ted said, it's the afternoon session today that we're kind of waiting for to see who's going to bring what and who's going to put what on the cars that might make a little bit more of a difference.
Sergio Perez has just gone out on a set of mediums. I wonder if we'll get an idea from his run on these compared to Charles' run yesterday afternoon, which are obviously different temperatures, different time of day, so you can't really compare it. But
you can compare him, sorry, Rachel, you can compare it to Drogovic, who's out there on a long run, 138.4. He's been pounding those in the last couple of laps. He's on the medium tyre as well. I don't know which type of the medium tyre. Let's
lots of yellow or less yellow?
Exactly, that's what I'm going to look for. So Sergio Perez comes into turn 10.
Not so much
Not
yellow.
so much yellow. So that is the C3.
You're checking on
I'm
you.
going to tell the world about it. He's such a
I could tell from the sound of your
Such a
voice. No, I could tell from the sound of your voice. It was the long drawn out C3.
Why do you
C2?
Oh.
It was a C2. I'm so
Because
choice.
that's going into the harder end of the range, so it must be the C2. The C3 would be the lots of yellow, wouldn't it?
C3's a lots of yellow.
That's why I came up here to help you out.
Why didn't you say at the time then?
So I was waiting for you to get it wrong.
Oh, yeah. So basically, you just admitted you're evil.
Oh, been a long 3 days.
That's what you are.
I share my name with James Hunt, says the latest tweet. Sadly, that's meant higher charges when hiring cars. Something to do with the crash damage waiver insurance. And Mr. Ben Limited, thank you. My 1-year-old son, Sterling, keeps turning to the screen when you mention Sterling Moss.
Oh,
named after Sir Sterling as a family connection to Mike Hawthorne, but no freebies yet from F1. Good morning, Sterling Moss. Turn to the screen again. I've got a photo of Sterling watching the telly as well. That's
Hi,
brilliant.
Sterling. There is another little connection to Sterling Moss. My dad, as Tony Brooks, once dated Sterling Moss's secretary. I mean, I'm trying to get
more
as
and more
tenuous a
bizarre.
link as I can get for you, but that is the
Best anecdote since Ant told a story about Enrique Benoldi holding his head at breakfast.
I don't know if she knew which Tony Brooks she was dating, though. I haven't asked. She was disappointed or not. I'm sure she's very happy.
Sterling Moss's second. Oh, that's fantastic.
Oh, and you wonder why I like motorsport. There's just so many strong connections there.
Oh, welcome.
McLaren's
if you're
on
just
track.
tuning in, there's 25 minutes to go in this session, and we're 10 minutes away from the virtual safety car. So let's watch Oscar Piastri. Right, they've made some modifications, fixings, as it were, to the wheel brows that have weakened again, something they'll sort out for the first race, but you rather get the feeling, and they're going to have to strengthen them, which means weight as well. And Piastri back out now that the fixing has dried.
Yeah, I saw him driving around earlier on. It looked like he was fully in command of the car, as you'd expect. And he was on a long run, so it looks like he's going to be now as well on the C1 tyre with the white text and white line. And yeah, it's a shame for him, you know, limiting his track time on this final day. But really, in terms of the relevance of it all, it's what's coming later on today. Once the sun goes down and the track starts to cool down a little bit. Hopefully the wind dies down as well as his manager looks on, Mark Webber. And, I mean, so good to have him there by your side, isn't it? All that wealth of experience.
To guide you through, you know, the massive learning curve that this year is going to be. Mark is staring intently at the screen there. I wonder how much. I probably need to ask him this actually. I'll try and find him during the lunch break. How much feedback he gives Oscar on driving and his driving style, or does he leave that to the McLaren team? Does he let the team deal with that? Because he's got Grand Prix winning experience. He vastly knowledgeable about the sport of motor racing and of course Formula One. So there would be a temptation to get involved in that conversation, but is that necessarily the best thing if the team don't want that?
It's more that Mark can be a bridge from the driver to the team. Sometimes the team may not phrase it in the same way to the driver as they would to a driver manager.
Yeah.
And Mark and vice versa. The driver does. You want it to be as much of a harmonious atmosphere in the team as it can be. And sometimes you need that driver manager to say the things you would really like to say, but it doesn't come from you. So it's kind of, it's less personal in many ways, and that filters back the other way. So it's nice also to have from Oscar Piastri's side somebody that has been there and done it. Mm-hmm. It's not about Mark saying to him, I would drive the car like this. I've seen the data and I've seen your onboard. I would do this if it was me. Mark hasn't driven these cars before in this current generation of Formula One. So Oscar knows what he's doing from inside the car. He knows what he's feeling. Mark doesn't have to tell him how to drive. It's all the other things that come with it that can be a weight on your shoulder that you carry and you feel stressed by. Lots of things that can halt your performance as an athlete that Mark can help to soothe in many ways, I guess. So it just makes, all you're trying to do as a manager is try to have those awkward conversations without upsetting. Look, we all go to work carrying problems, don't we? Yeah. And it can affect the way you work. Of course it can. How nice would it be to just turn up to work without any of those problems affecting you?
He's there to lighten the load, isn't he?
Yeah,
He's there
exactly.
to take those away from him so he can just concentrate on the racing. He'll give him the tools to be able to deal with it so that he can concentrate on the racing.
That's what a driver needs to be able to do. Get in the car and drive.
It's funny, but we expect that that's exactly what the drivers do. Just get in the car and drive. They haven't got any problems at all. I mean, look at them. They're all young and handsome and exceptionally well paid. But
there could be someone even younger than you and even more handsome than you, waiting in the wings to steal your drive, Crofty.
You almost sound bitter, Ant.
No, but even waiting there with more backing than maybe you could ever bring, and that becomes a bit tense with it. All those kind of niggly little things that can really annoy you and put you off your game as a driver, and you need somebody else to be fighting those fires for you.
It's a very good point. That's
lots of things you cannot imagine the pressure that they're all under.
A good manager Yeah. Can give you probably 2 or 3 tenths, can't he?
Knows when to let you be aware of those situations and when not to, and when to fight your corner in the right way. Everything that Mark does is about trying to make Oscar drive freely and the best he can.
I just read this. You're going to love this. I was named after Jacques Villeneuve, says Jacques. And the nurse on the ward's partner was Jacques Villeneuve's chauffeur. Now that is your tenuous link for the day there.
Amazing.
And this I also absolutely love. It's not F1 related, sadly. And I've now Squiggles Maloney, I've just seen this. My uncle was called David Croft. Excellent. What a great name. Get him in the commentary box. I actually there's a David Croft in Perth that's about a third cousin of mine, and I met him a few years ago as well, which was lovely. My dog is called Martin Brundle. Toby Bloomfield. My dog is called Martin Brundle. This is not F1 related, but I love it. From 1971, the landlord at the Ben Jonson, Staniforth Street in Birmingham was Jeff Christmas, says Paul Gamage. Guess what his wife's name was? Mary.
I mean, as tangents go.
That's another made-up joke.
No, it's a true story.
That's the kind of stuff we have to put up with on the drive here.
We can see it coming a mile off. Like the photographers out there at the end of the straight, we can see a Crofty joke coming a mile off.
Merry Christmas.
We're building up. He's building up. He's building. Yeah.
It doesn't matter, Crofty, how many times you say it. It's not going to make it any funnier.
Merry Christmas. I think it's hilarious, quite frankly. If my name was Christmas and I had a daughter, I would seriously consider. Or if my surname was New Year, I'd be Harry.
Driving freely, meanwhile, any Crofty jokes that Mark Webber's filtering out as we speak.
It's not in his mind anymore.
Can
Putting the laps
turn
in.
one as he wishes.
How do we think Oscar Piastri is going to do this season? Or let's put this another way. What would be an acceptable and a good return this season for Oscar Piastri?
Being very close to Lando. Doesn't have to beat him, but being very close to Lando, I believe.
Being better than Daniel Ricciardo was against Lando Norris.
Agreed, yeah.
I think that is the answer.
Mm.
And
I think that would be
anything less than
acceptable.
that, not just for Oscar Piastri, but for McLaren, is not acceptable because they've stuck their neck out to say, Daniel, it's got to end. We need you to go. It's not working. They brought in the young hotshot from Melbourne, and he is a hotshot. His junior Formula record is massively impressive. He has to be better than Daniel Ricciardo. Otherwise, the change didn't need making.
He's, while I was actually in the paddock and not paying as much attention to what you wanted me to, unfortunately, I did speak to someone who knows him very well.
Who?
And Oscar knows Oscar very well, and they were saying he is all about racing. I was saying, well, what hobbies, what does he like to do? And they said he is all about racing. This is it. This has always been his focus, and this is, some drivers have other hobbies outside that you hear about and you see, but this is it for him. He is all about this opportunity and this racing. So he will give. I know you can't give more than 100%, but if you could, he would be doing it. So
I've heard he's pretty level-headed as well.
Yes.
So if he wins a race, for example, and he's driven some heroic race, and everyone's chuffed to bits, and including himself, he's got big smiles initially out the car, sprays the champagne, happy days, but then very quickly returns back to just horizontal position and monotone answers, and he's just fully focused all the time. So and I think that hopefully we're holding him in good stead as well.
To deal with the highs and lows, you've got to be able to find your base level in the middle somewhere, haven't you?
Ted, down to you. Where are you, sir?
Hey, Crofty, just outside Red Bull Racing, where Sergio Perez has, just made an interesting pit stop in terms of he came in. Oh, I didn't know I was going to be busy. There you go. I'll take the sunglasses off. Where he came in and stopped in the pit box. They took off the left rear tyre, and then Paul Monaghan, chief engineer, came and took a picture of the inside rim of the left rear. And then they have a camera. What I noticed when he came into the garage, they had a camera looking back at that left rear tyre. When he came in, Adrian Newey, who we can now see at the back of the garage just next to Hugh Bird, the tall engineer of Sergio Perez, was taking a look at that area. So just something to put in your memory banks if we get to the Bahrain Grand Prix next week, and see if there's any kind of issue around there. It'll just be something that would have shown up on either a bit of skirting or a bit of chafing around that wheel hub, perhaps, or something they wanted to keep an eye on. They had a camera on it, and then they had some attention from the front engineers, the top engineers. But anyway, they've changed the tyres, and Sergio has. There we go. That's got it. The Sergio has rejoined the track, and yeah, it all seems to be calm down here, which is
Ted, can I ask you something?
Which is good. Yes, Rachel.
A short while ago, they did another pit stop where one of the tyres, I think on the front right, wasn't ready, was it? Paul Monahan looked quite sort of agitated then as well. I think pit stops so far have been their problem this test. They had that rear jack issue, and earlier on the pit stop with Perez didn't go very well either.
Well, Paul Monahan looking sort of troubled is him in a good mood. So I don't think it would have been a problem. There seems to be some things when they come in and do a practice pit stop that they want to check. So I think when they practice a pit stop, as many of these teams will be doing, because that's one of the things they want to practice in testing before the weekend, race weekend actually starts, you'll know about it and they'll do a quick pit stop. I would imagine, based on what I just saw, that there was a pit stop that they wanted to have a look at something as the tyre came off. Unless he was waving his arms around and shaking his head and saying, that's a very bad pit stop, Rachel. I didn't see it. Was that the kind of
no,
vibe you were
it was
getting?
more towards the front right, and the tyres, they came in, and from what I remember, 3 of the tyres went on the front right, didn't go on, and he waved to the guy holding the tyre, and then they seemed to swap tyres around or put them all back on again. It was it just looked a little bit strange. Okay. It didn't look like they were checking something. It looked like there was something happened.
Yeah, he took a picture of the inside rim of the left rear, so that was very much deliberate. Yeah, it's. I mean, he likes photography, does Pedals, but not to that extent. But yeah, they're doing it again. They've got another pit stop coming in, so we'll keep across it. We have a live camera down here, so we'll keep across it, and you can watch it happen yourself.
Thanks, Ted.
It is now, without doubt, the most important time of the day and most interesting time of the day, and the time of the day that gets us very excited. It's virtual safety car time. And I'm all for the need to test all this out. I didn't realise we were going to do it every single day.
Yes, that's why we've got the extra running every day, so they can go through it all. Do you want another tenuous story?
No, go for it.
I sat next to Paul Monahan on a flight once, and he told me how to fix my oven at home, which wasn't working. Knows everything about everything, Paul Monahan at Red Bull.
He certainly does. He hasn't spoken to me about football this week. He hasn't come to find me about football, but then...
Which is his team?
Liverpool.
Ah.
Who obviously didn't have the greatest time in the Champions League this week. It's a shame. I was going to high-five him.
That's a joke about the score, Ant, in the football.
Right, thank you very much.
Just thought I'd let you know.
Virtual safety car test to be followed by... I assume a red flag test and maybe a standing start where the drivers will pull away one by one off the grid, not go for it for a race down to the first corner, as much as we'd like to see that.
And maybe a rehearsal of a car's hybrid system failing.
So we did do that yesterday. It was a rehearsal. If you remember, there was a slight confusion as to what was going on at the end, but it was definitely a rehearsal. And during that rehearsal, the engineers,
this was down at Williams, by the way, for those of you that didn't see it yesterday.
That's Nick de Vries just into turn 4. Just watch him on the exit of that.
Oh, and gets the old repass.
Yeah, pass and repass.
That's the problem with turn 4. You see, you get all the dust on the inside, and you leave too much of a space to your left-hand side. That allows the car on the outside, on the racing line, to switch over and get a better exit as you understeer wide out of the corner. And that's a perfect display there by Sergio Perez, how you do the cutback.
We've had some great racing through that part of the circuit.
Exactly. Yeah. He knew what he was doing, Sergio, and he thought, it's time for the old switcheroo. Forget pass and repass, old switcheroo.
Switcheroo, okay.
I'll go with that one. And yeah, so Williams, Logan Sargent pulled into his pit box and jumped out of the car as if the car was live. It wasn't live because the green LED light was on right at the top. And then the mechanics in their marigold gloves, standing by not to touch the car, because it could be live. It was a drill. It was a practice. They found an issue. They thought that actually the car was live. There was a problem with the ERS system, but there wasn't. It was always a drill. And it was always a practice that they had to do to get signed off by the FIA. The thing is that they actually thought they found an issue, because built into this practice was, there's an issue. Yeah, you're going to have to deal with this issue. We're going to simulate this. But nobody knew.
Wow, okay. So a proper test.
Like a proper for real test that was always a drill.
It was a human test as much as a protocol.
Which is
on
good
what to
thinking
do
by the
during
team.
session. Yeah.
It's good thinking by the team, because if you think it's a rehearsal, you don't necessarily take it. You always take it seriously, but you know it's a rehearsal. Whereas if you then find a fault, you really will find how people react.
So here's the thing: maybe not something Williams used to do. Maybe something that was
been brought in by James Vowles,
done for the first time. Maybe introduced by the new team principal. I actually don't know that for definite, because I don't know who decided on that test or not.
He stopped talking to us. Now he's become all important. We don't hear these little.
Does he not reply to your messages anymore, Anne? Is this what we're getting from this?
To be fair, he did this morning. He was the one that told me about the usage of tyres and why we're seeing drivers out there and teams using the C4 and the C5 when that's not going to be our tyre next weekend.
Second,
and just sorry, Rachel,
Yes.
just in case people weren't with us a little earlier on, why have the C4 and C5 tyres been used this morning?
Because we will be using them at circuits coming up thick and fast through this ever tight season that we have with 23 races on the calendar. So you want to get a good idea, and this is a perfect time to do it, as to where the range sits now. With this one extra tyre, the C0 injected into the mix with six tyres now, a different tyre altogether from Pirelli this year, despite those 6 elements in between. The whole concept has changed. So even the weight of the tyre has gone up. So there's a lot to learn, and it's just a data gathering exercise it's not a glory run. Like, it's easy for us to see. As I said at the top, we only have the lap times to go by. But there's always a lot more going on that meets the eye, and that's why the teams are putting their drivers through cycling them through different compounds. Even though we're not using that next week, it's not just as simple as it's a glory run.
I was just about to say, sorry, we saw a shot of Felipe Drogovic, and importantly, 77 laps, second most laps, tied, I should say, with Nico Hulkenberg. But is that the last time we see him in that car? Will we see him back here?
Russell's done 80.
Yes, I said second most.
Oh, is it with? I said
tied with Hulkenberg on 77. That's all right. But will we see him back next week? Because that's his running done. Fernando Alonso gets in the car this afternoon.
De Vries has done 87.
Oh, he has. I need glasses.
We're competitive. We don't usually.
We are competitive.
We're competitive with each
I'm glad
other.
I'm not flying back with you. I'm glad you're staying here and I'm going home. But we don't know if that's the last time Felipe's in the car. If he's getting out now, those are the laps he's done ahead of potentially taking part in the race weekend next weekend.
Are we expecting Fernando to jump back in?
This afternoon we are.
He is, okay.
That is a definite. Fernando's back in. I mean, he did 130 laps yesterday. He's only just getting going, bless him. Is Lance Stroll going to drive next week? I am no medical expert, as much as I'd like to think it. I'm not a doctor, so I don't know the extent fully of Lance's injury. What I do know is the team are going to give him every opportunity to get in the car, to get in the sim, to strengthen the wrist, because it is a wrist injury. We couldn't possibly say, because nobody actually knows, and that is the truth. We give you a steer, but I can't give you an accurate steer because I'm not a medical expert. I think the key question for me is, if you have injured yourself and you are rushing to get back, why in a 23 race season are you rushing to be back? Because surely you want to be back fit, not injuring yourself again because you've come back too soon.
and this isn't a back-to-back. There's a gap between this race and Saudi Arabia, so there is plenty of time for him to actually get properly fit. Why would you risk it?
Well, let's ask the person that, you know, has driven a car and might have got injured from time to time. You know, it's every time he walks through an airport security, you know, his collarbone goes off.
I was going to say, so I've jumped back in the car 6 weeks after doing it and breaking my collarbone with surgery, metal plate still in there today. I've driven a car when I've dislocated my shoulder. Again, I think it was about 5 or 6 weeks afterwards. Broke my back, of course, at Le Mans in 2012. That took 6 months before I got back in a car. And broken ribs many, many times in karting and also in crashes I've had in other forms of motorsport, as Russell lays a lot of rubber down in preparation for next week's running. Just get a bit of rubber in there. Unlikely to rain here. Not impossible, but unlikely to rain here. So the rubber should stay in that position. And yeah, every time I've injured myself and got back in the car, there's always an element of doubt whether you're going to feel a lot of pain when you drive. And I say most often you're pleasantly surprised that it doesn't hurt as much as you feared it would. Never had a wrist injury though. And yeah, despite having power steering on these cars, it's still very heavy to turn.
Yeah.
And with a lot of vibration. So you just don't know. And even after driving the simulator car, you don't know until you get in the real car with all the G-force as well. Because in the sim, you don't have G-force weighing on your arms and your hands on the body as you turn through a corner. You just literally are turning the weight of the wheel.
Yeah.
Which again reacts in a slightly different way to that of a real tyre against a real road surface. So there will still be question marks, even if he has a successful sim test, whether he can drive at 100%. All I know is that every time I have injured myself and get back in, you feel like, well, what's a couple of days extra? If I would get in 5 days earlier or 5 days later, is that really going to is that the be all and end all of that crossover point of I'm ready or I'm not?
Yeah.
In reality, it's longer than that. So my gut instinct is, if he was anywhere near ready, thinking about getting in the car next week, he probably would have given it a go here.
Yeah.
He would have been physically fit enough and ready enough to go, I'm going to try it. Because I tell you, in 5 days, that's not going to make a huge amount of difference.
Can I ask you though? So when you came back from injury, and when, for example, when Fernando came back from his injury from the Australia crash, it was the medical personnel at the track, the FIA said, no, you can't race. So for Lance, what tests will he have to go through to prove that he can drive? He can say it, his doctors can say it, but what will the FIA do to say you are
have
fit
to do
to
an
drive?
extraction test for start.
Exactly, you have to do that. But is there anything else they'll put him through?
We should really ask the FIA, the doctors, maybe here right now or who will arrive next week. They can answer that question properly. But from, again, using my experience, the last injury I had was a rib injury. I was ready to drive in Fuji a couple of years ago, and I knew I was ready. But the FIA medical team were aware of the injury I had sustained and weren't comfortable with me getting back in the car. So their test was simply just to squeeze my rib cage. Quite a lot of force on it.
Oh, they gave you a hug.
They basically gave me a bear hug, yeah. And it was fine, but it was quite, in a way, quite elementary. Because how else do you test really the force that's going to go through your ribs in the car? So that was the way it tested.
Just picking up on your point though, that, you know, if Lance, you know, can drive next week, you'd have thought he'd have been here because it's not going to make that much difference. They're not actually doing lights. They're just doing practice starts on the grid because we're not under red flag conditions still. Just a little thought about that. If he came here thinking, well, it's close and close to the race and I think I'm okay and I can do it, and got in the car and after 2 laps went, no, I can't. No, I can't do this. Team's lost a huge amount of running, haven't they? Because at the very least, they've got to change the pedals, change the seat, put another driver in. And I don't actually know if you've declared a driver for a session in testing, whether you can stick another driver in during that session. So there's the potential there to lose a whole session if if Lance wasn't fit enough to have driven and had come here to give it a try. And when you've only got a 3-day test,
Yeah, no, I see where you're coming from.
you're basically losing a sixth of your running if he's not fit enough.
Exactly. Yeah, but the same thing could happen next week if he decides to during a free practice session.
Well,
I'm
Well,
ready.
yes, but you're only losing an hour, and I know in terms of fractions, you know you're losing a third of your practice, but it's only an hour, and it's not your pre-season test, and you've not got a huge amount of program to run through that you're now not going to get through, and you know you can then go and you can change the setup in the car for another driver. And you've also got that reserve driver accustomed to the new car.
Like I say, only he knows how he feels.
Correct.
And if he felt like he was confident to get in and drive next Friday, he would probably be confident to drive this afternoon in the evening session.
Yeah.
That's all I'm saying.
Yeah.
Because not much else is going to change.
But is it possible that decision was taken out of his hands by the team to say, actually, we need mileage, we need reliability, we need to know where that car is, and your fitness will prove in the week. Don't forget, there is a chance to get the car on the track with Lance in it before next Friday, and that's in between the test and the race.
That's great that they can use that opportunity.
Yeah.
But like I'm saying, every time I've injured myself, I thought, yeah, I kind of knew instinctively if I'd be okay or not.
Yeah.
And 5 days didn't really change anything in that progress.
Truth is, the team, we were discussing this last night as well, weren't we? That actually, it's up to the team and it's up to Lance as to when they want to tell us, you know, the extent of the injury, what the injury actually is, and whether Lance is coming back or not.
Because it's not going to stop people hypothesizing and jump into conclusions anyway.
And
we're doing it right now.
And I know in some quarters, you know, various sections of the media said, no, you should be telling us what's going on. Well, this is someone's, you know, physical fitness, and it's up to the team to decide as and when they want to put that information out there. And, you know, we're not going to speculate on the extent of Lance's injury at all, but
the only reason
I do know it is to do with his wrist.
The only reason that he'll be pushing incredibly hard now to get back in for the first race is because the car looks quick.
Yes,
correct.
Exactly.
If it was last year's car, you'd be like, I'll take it or leave it. I think, I'll just rest up, thanks.
If it was me, I'd really want to be getting into that car, given where he knew the car would have been at this stage last year.
But weigh it up as well, though, because if you do more damage to yourself by doing that one race, you could potentially miss more than just one race in a car that is phenomenal in a busy season.
Another good point.
Putting my sensible head on.
You never take your sensible head off,
I might
Rachel.
as well go to a different head for every day.
No, this is why the likes of Ant and I associate with yourself and call you a true friend, because, you know, you're the sensible one of this trio.
That makes you sound incredibly dull.
Sensible, not dull. There's absolutely nothing dull about
and
sensible.
I'm not doing very well here this
To be
week.
fair, Crofty, the bar isn't set particularly high
This
on that
is
one.
true.
So,
This
yeah.
is true. It doesn't take much to be more sensible than you two.
I love this. We've got a school teacher, we've had Professor Pat. You know, we've covered all bases. And I'm going to spend the lunch break, you know, going through my periodic table, quite frankly.
Wasn't that brilliant?
Superb. So we sit at the dinner table, Daniel, you know, goes to the periodic table and coming up with elements I have no idea, I've never even heard of. I probably did at one stage of my life, but I've completely forgotten them now.
I do feel like there are more now than when we learnt it, I have to say.
Oh, discoveries all the time. Unobtainium, is that a real element? Is that on the periodic table, or is that just what Formula One teams want to put in their cars to make it go faster? Because it's lighter and more expensive. Unobtainium.
There might be. Who knows?
Right, what are we going to see this afternoon then?
The sun go down.
Okay, and it get cooler.
The temperature, actually, will we see the temperature fall?
We won't see the temperature fall. We will feel the
Yes.
temperature fall. In the heat of the day, C4 tyres for Charles Leclerc with the fastest time by 4/10 from George Russell on the C5. Felipe Drugovich completes his testing program. Second off the pace, also on the C5 tyres. Sergio Perez putting in 69 laps. He's got all day to do some more. And on the C3 tyre, 1.5 seconds near enough off the pace. Gasly, Albon, Hulkenberg, Piastri, Bottas and De Vries completing the top 10. Bottas stopping on the track with what looked like gearbox problems. We'll be back this afternoon to give you more information on that and to complete our coverage of the testing session. And when we finish, the lights will be on. Representative conditions for the race next week here in Bahrain. But Ferrari topping the timing charts this morning. 67 laps from Charles Leclerc, fastest by 0.4.
Thank you.